Life is better with sprinkles, even in the North Pole. Now, in the suburb of Holiday Haven, those sprinkles tend to come atop a steaming mug of cocoa, served up by one of two fairies, Holly or her sister, Ivy. The pair ran the Candy Cane Cafe, and while they had the tendency to dish out gossip and nonsense alongside their famous hot cocoa and scones, it was still one of my favorite places to visit whenever I came into town. It also made a good place for dates with Corbin Frost, my boyfriend of just about a year. Or at least it did any time other than November and December. The closer it got to Christmas, the crazier things got in the small town. I realized my mistake as soon as I opened the door of the small cafe. "Afternoon, Lumi," Ivy exclaimed, her tiny voice barely audible over the hum of patrons' chatter. There were 2.5 weeks until Christmas, and Holiday Haven had turned into a full-blown tourist town once again. Magical beings came from all over the world to visit the North Pole and its surrounding suburbs this time of year. The tourists were the lifeblood for many of Holiday Haven's businesses, including my own family's. But it was still a little jarring to walk into normally peaceful shops and find them packed. I twinkled my fingers in Ivy's direction as I glanced around the shop, hoping to spot an unoccupied table. Corbin was supposed to meet me here in 15 minutes. But, considering the state of the place, I might need to take our usual order to go. The tiny fairies jingled as they swooped and dove through the air, whipping up drinks for the customers in line ahead of me. The scene would likely be daunting to even the most skilled of baristas. Luckily for Holly and Ivy, they had magic on their side. With a grin, Ivy sent a shower of fairy dust toward an insulated whipped cream canister. The silver cylinder floated off the counter, flipped upside down in midair, and dispensed a perfect dollop onto a pair of mugs. With another shot of her magic, she started foaming up some milk. Beside her, Holly had her own shower of magic sparkles wrapped around 3 cocoa mugs, filled to the brim with clouds of whipped cream. The mugs levitated off the counter and sailed through the crowded cafe, and landed without spilling so much as a drop, rousing a boisterous cheer from a table full of elves. With a grin, Holly spun around, her wings beating even faster as she sent another arc of magic to collect the dirty mugs left in a bin placed near the front door. She collected them and sent them whizzing to the kitchen. I smiled as I watched them work. It was almost like attending a concert of sorts, with each of them conducting their magic to help the other. Holly and Ivy could be a little spacey, but when it came to making cocoa, they were unmatched. Every so often, I checked over my shoulder, waiting for Corbin to come through the shop's front doors. A flutter of anticipation curled through my stomach when I heard the bell jingle, only for it to recede when I turned back and didn't see his wide smile. "How's it going, Lumi?" Holly asked, zipping near in a shower of fairy dust. She paused to wipe her brow with a pastel-pink handkerchief. "Is it just me, or are things busier than usual around here?" "It's not just you," I replied. "We've had about 1.5 times the normal amount of visitors out at the sanctuary over the past week." Ivy buzzed by, offering a smile before tossing handfuls of chocolate sprinkles onto a tray full of cocoa mugs. "We can barely keep up around here," she said, sending the tray floating across the room to a large group of customers who had pushed 2 tables together near the fireplace. "I'm surprised you made it into town at all," Holly said. "Oh, well, I have a dress fitting with Aunt Viv," I explained. Both fairies paused their work and swooned. "Oh, yes, the Yule Ball," Ivy sighed. "What color is your gown this year?" I smiled. Sometimes I thought I was the only woman in all of Holiday Haven who didn't like the annual gala. Even though I was no longer single, I would still prefer a night in front of the fire with a good book over getting glammed up for a flashy night out in the North Pole. "I'm not sure yet," I told the fairies. "I just told Aunt Viv I needed a dress." Holly and Ivy turned toward each other, their eyes wide. When they glanced back at me, they wore identical expressions of skepticism. "But Lumi," Ivy started, "it's a big night for you. I'm sure the paparazzi will be there to capture the whole thing." "Oh, no," Holly interrupted. Prince Corbin will shoo them away. Surely he won't allow them to intrude on such a special moment. I frowned. Right. Corbin was no more thrilled about the Yule Ball than I was. But as a royal prince and the second in line to the Frost Kingdom throne, he had to attend. Not to mention Jack would be there, and someone needed to keep him from getting into trouble. Still, I didn't need to tell Holly and Ivy Corbin's true thoughts on the event, nor my own, for that matter. It was best to smile and nod. If I'd learned anything about royal expectations in the year since meeting Corbin, it was that no comment was almost always the best policy. Speaking of Corbin, I said with a polite smile, he's on his way. So if I could get 2 cocos to go, I would appreciate it. Holly and Ivy snapped back into action, their starry-eyed looks morphing back into focused concentration. Holly rang up the purchase, and I dropped all of the change into the candy cane-striped tip jar before shuffling to the other end of the counter to wait for Ivy to finish the drinks. It was too busy in the cafe. A walk through the town square sounded better anyway. Colder, to be sure, but I hadn't yet had time to visit the outdoor Christmas market, and I had about an hour before Aunt Vivian expected me at her dress shop, silver and gold garments. I pulled off my gloves and retrieved my phone from the pocket of my thick winter coat, intending to text Corbin an update and get his ETA, when something caught the corner of my eye. A stack of magazines was piled off to one side of the bar, and the glossy cover of the one on top had a photo of Corbin's profile, walking down the sidewalk in front of a jewelry store window I didn't recognize. The headline at the top of the photo read, "A Royal Rift? Tired of waiting on permanent bachelor Jack Frost, Prince Corbin looks set to buck royal tradition and take a winter bride. Is Lumi Northrup in for a Yule Ball to remember? Details about the pending proposal inside." My breath caught in the back of my throat, and I looked up at the 2 fairies blitzing back and forth on the other side of the counter. So that's what they meant by it being a special night. They thought Corbin planned to propose at the Yule Ball. Oh, of all the ridiculous things, I muttered as I grabbed the magazine. I shoved it to the bottom of the stack. But a tendril of curiosity gave me pause. With a sigh, I dragged the magazine back out and flipped it open to the page number printed on the front cover. There were a series of photos showing Corbin entering the jewelry store, with the final one capturing him mid-stride as he left, a small gift bag in hand. My stomach flip-flopped, and I turned the page, only to find an advertisement for some kind of anti-wrinkle potion. With a scoff, I tossed the magazine back to the stack. So he went to a jewelry store, a few weeks before Christmas. That didn't mean anything. Did it? Another quiver surged through me, and I about jumped out of my skin when Ivy called my name. Eyes wide, I turned to find the fairy extending a pair of travel cups toward me on a wave of fairy dust. "Is everything all right?" she asked. "Mm-hmm. Perfectly. Thanks again." I snatched the drinks from mid-air and made my way back through the crowded shop as another cluster of patrons pushed inside. I was down to the dregs of my cocoa by the time Corbin called. I tossed the nearly empty cup into a trash bin near one of the Christmas market stalls, one selling an assortment of festive costumes for dogs. I'd briefly considered asking if they could make things rabbit-sized, but didn't think Sugar Plum would agree to wear a costume even if they did. I couldn't blame him, but the idea of the Arctic hare in a hat with a pair of faux antlers was hard to resist. I accepted the call and pressed the phone to my ear. "Are you at the market?" I asked, already glancing around, expecting to see his head above the busy market. One perk of dating a tall guy. They were much easier to spot in a crowd. "Market?" Corbin's deep, almost gruff voice replied. "You must not have seen my message." Frowning, I pulled the phone away long enough to glance at my notifications. Sure enough, there was a text from Corbin saying he wasn't able to meet me in time. "I'm just seeing it," I said, holding the phone back up to my ear. I'm really sorry, Lumi. You have no idea how much I wanted to see you today. It's been too long. I smiled sadly at his pained tone. I miss you too. What's Jack up to this time? Did he finally manage to break his leg doing his frost core? The Frost King had recently taken up his own version of parkour, using his ice magic to make his stunts bigger and more dangerous as he raced around the course he'd created in one of the castle's courtyards. Almost a year had passed since Jack ascended to the throne, but he hadn't fully settled into his regal role. Corbin had put a stop to some of Jack's antics, but he'd allowed the so-called Frost Core to continue, declaring it an outlet for his older brother's pent-up energy. No, Corbin said with a sigh, clearly not amused. He's actually been in meetings most of the day. My brow arched. Did you duct tape him to a chair? That drew a soft chuckle, and my heart swelled. No need in this case. He's voluntarily been showing up every day this week. On time, even. The zoning committee has been meeting to discuss some potential changes to the downtown area, and it turns out Jack has a lot of opinions on where the new road should go. I guess all that time spent on his snowmobile might come in handy. I laughed. Who knew? I expected him to join in my laughter, but there was a pause on the other end of the line as muffled voices spoke in the background. I heard a door close, and could imagine Corbin stealing away to a private room in the expansive castle made of ice. Sorry about that, he said, his voice strong again. It's hectic here. What time is your appointment this afternoon? I glanced at the time on my phone before answering. Aunt Viv is expecting me at 2. And afterward? I should get back home. We have the big sponsor appreciation banquet on Saturday. It's been so busy all week, we're behind on some of the prep for the party. It's going to be all hands on deck to get everything set up on time. My heart sank as the possibility of seeing Corbin drifted further away. Right, of course. Corbin made a frustrated sound in his throat. Jack is booked up with more meetings tomorrow. While he's occupied, I was planning to meet with the Royal Council to finalize some details for the summit next month. Well, you'll be at the sanctuary this weekend, right? I asked. That's the plan, Corbin replied. If I can get all of this squared away over the next few days, I promise I'll be all yours this weekend. I'll even muck stalls. I laughed. Now that would get the tabloids talking. For a minute, I considered telling him about the article I'd seen in the Evergreen Inquirer, but stopped short. I was sure it was nothing more than a cooked-up story to sell magazines. For all I knew, Corbin was at that jewelry store to pick up something for himself. And even if it was something meant for me, that didn't mean it was an engagement ring. Then again, buying me any kind of jewelry would be an odd gift, considering I spent most of my days covered in mud and hay. I doubted Sugar Plum or the reindeers would be too impressed by a diamond bracelet. The Frost Pixies probably would, but then I'd have to fight them off to keep them from carrying it to one of their hollows to use as some kind of pixie-sized disco ball. I should get going, Corbin said, pulling me from my thoughts. I'm sorry about today. I promise I'll make it up to you. It's okay, really. I'll see you this weekend. I can't wait. We hung up the phone, and I took another lap around the market, finishing off the cocoa I'd purchased for Corbin, seeing as he wouldn't be needing it. I took my time, stopping at most of the booths, even though they didn't change much from year to year. I knew most of the vendors and struck up casual conversation when I could, but the market was bustling with busy shoppers, and there wasn't always time to do more than offer a smile or wave as I passed from booth to booth. Even though I lived in a place steeped in holiday tradition, this time of year always felt special to me. The market was filled with familiar sights and smells that made it officially feel like Christmas. The garlands and twinkling lights, the poinsettias and decorated trees, the spiced cider and roasted chestnuts and kettle corn. I couldn't help but let myself get lost in the wonder of it. And hey, if that meant getting a jump on my holiday shopping, so be it. With the second cocoa finished and a few small gifts purchased, I dragged myself from the market and made my way to Silver and Gold Garments. It wasn't too far from the town square, so I opted to walk rather than try to flag down a passing snowmobile taxi for a ride. It was odd being in town without Starly, but she'd been commissioned to give little flying reindeer rides to some of the children visiting the sanctuary. She was by far one of the most docile reindeer, and a good size for smaller children. She didn't seem to mind the extra attention and candy canes either. My mom had dropped me off on her way to the pole to have lunch with my younger brother, Klein. He lived and worked in the pole, and he treated Mom to lunch and a manicure every few weeks. Klein and Mom were two peas in a pod. They were more comfortable at brunch or in a salon than in a barn. My older brother, Stephen, fell somewhere in between. He didn't mind getting his hands dirty, but I knew he didn't see himself taking over operations of the reindeer sanctuary when Mom and Dad passed on. He lived in a cottage on the property, but his life was busy as a single father. He shared custody with his ex-wife, Nicole, and held down a full-time job off the farm. Neither of my parents had asked me what my plans were long-term. Until recently, I hadn't given them much of a reason to wonder. The sanctuary was my life, and I wanted to keep it that way. I rose early to tend to the animals, looked after the frost pixies, and helped coordinate visitor events when the holiday season began. I could do it all. I knew the practical and business sides inside and out, and couldn't imagine my life any other way. At least, not until I'd met Corbin. I certainly never expected to fall in love with a prince. Not even as a young girl had I ever dreamed of becoming a princess. I'd been too busy learning to ride horses and care for the other animals that lived in the frozen woods surrounding my childhood home. I was happiest with the wind blowing through my hair, a pair of work gloves on my hands, not at some stuffy soiree with foreign ambassadors. My idea of a perfect gift was a pair of new waterproof coveralls or an electric hand warmer, not diamond bracelets or fancy carriages. Corbin was wonderful, and I didn't want to lose him. But lately, my mind had taken to wandering. In the quiet moments spent alone in the barn late at night, or flying over the Pixie Hollow, I wondered where any of this was heading. I didn't want to give up my way of life, and Corbin couldn't opt out of his. We ran on parallel tracks, intersecting for a moment, only to be pulled apart again. It seemed only a matter of time before those tracks diverged for good, regardless of what the tabloids proclaimed. As I stepped inside my aunt's boutique, I couldn't help but think that this year's Yule Ball might not be the beginning of something new, but, rather, the end. 2. A sparrow-sized fairy darted past as I closed the shop's door behind me. "Lumi," the fairy chirped, a blur of fairy dust and a shock of green hair. "You're early." "Is that okay? I was getting chilly outside," I asked, already halfway out of my gloves. Aunt Viv's shop was small, and there was already a customer inside at the trifold mirror. The woman was statuesque, with waist-length raven curls, wearing a stunning gown in a merlot color. A fairy with periwinkle hair and a splash of blue freckles across her tiny nose surged above the woman's head, showering her with blue fairy dust.
"Of course it's okay, Lumi. Sterling is just being a stress case as usual."
Sterling, the green-haired male fairy, shot his coworker a scowl before darting off to retrieve a spool of thread from a meticulously organized box on the counter.
"Watch your tongue, Winterspell. For all you know, I pulled your name in the Secret Santa drawing."
Winterspell giggled and fluttered around to take in her handiwork on the gown modeled by the dark-haired woman.
"I think we're all set, Sherry. Let's get you out of this. We'll finish up these last alterations and have you all set for the ball."
The woman nodded and carefully made her way behind the curtain to the small dressing room area. With her client busy, Winterspell zipped back across the shop and hovered in midair behind the counter. She gestured at a tray of artfully decorated sugar cookies.
"Would you like one? Pearl Markham dropped them off earlier today. We're having a little trouble getting rid of them. Everyone is too worried about fitting into their Yule Ball gowns.
I smiled. No, thank you. I'm already risking a cocoa sugar rush.
There's never a shortage of treats this time of year,
Winterspell agreed. We aren't quite finished with your gown, Sterling interjected as he fluttered over to join us. He glanced down at the cookies, ran a hand over his midsection, then shook his head and diverted his attention. Vivian wanted to see it on you once more before she had us finish the hemline and sleeves. No problem, I replied. We still have a couple of weeks to go. What about Prince Corvin? Do you know where he is getting his suit from? Perhaps we can send a coordinating handkerchief or necktie, Sterling suggested. Oh, I'm not really sure. I think he'll probably just pick something from his closet. Winterspell sighed dreamily.
I'll bet he has an amazing closet.
I smiled politely. He does have quite the collection, but a pocket square isn't a bad idea. Excellent, Sterling replied. It's bound to be a special night. We'll want to see to every detail. Winterspell slid Sterling a sideways smile. Sterling puffed out his chest and flapped his wings. Lumi, I'm not ordinarily one to participate in town gossip. I find the whole idea rather tawdry, truth be told, but there is something you should know. I had a feeling I knew where this was headed. With a soft smile, I held up a hand, stopping the fairy short. If this is about the article in the Evergreen Inquirer, I already know. And while I appreciate the heads up, I really don't think there's anything to get worked up about. It's just silly rumors. Winterspell's tiny brow furrowed.
Are you sure, Lumi?
Nodding, I peeked past them. Where is Aunt Viv? Before either Sterling or Winterspell could answer, the curtain at the other end of the counter parted and Vivian Lamont appeared. One arm wrapped around the shoulders of the dark-haired woman. I'm so glad you like it. It might be my new favorite, Aunt Viv told her. Technically speaking, Vivian and I weren't related. She and my mom were long-term friends, and my brothers and I grew up calling her Aunt Viv. Her warm brown skin was flawless, with only the softest of smile lines to hint at her age. She preferred a natural makeup look, all except for her lips. I was convinced she slept in her bold and bright lipstick. Aunt Viv tossed me a wink as she finished saying goodbye to her client. As soon as the woman left the shop, Aunt Viv rushed over and embraced me. Lumi, dear, it's so good to see you. Smiling into her shoulder, I squeezed her back. How are you? Mom said you were traveling all summer. Paris, New York, Berlin. It all sounded so exciting. Aunt Viv stepped back, still holding me by the shoulders for another moment. Oh, yes, it was a whirlwind. But you know me, I'm happiest when I get to come back home to Holiday Haven. She laughed and let me go. Come, let's get you into your dress. I know you're short on time. Where's that handsome prince of yours? Sterling and Winterspell buzzed into the back room, leaving me alone with Aunt Viv, though I had the feeling they were both keeping one ear cocked to overhear my reply. He's at the castle, busy as always. I tried to smile, but it felt a little thin. Aunt Viv bustled around the small seating area surrounding the mirrors and platform. She fluffed a pillow and plucked an empty champagne flute from the small glass table between the love seat and high-back upholstered chair. Did Sterling talk to you about the option to add a handkerchief or tie to your order? Yes, I replied. Sounds like a good idea to me. Turning, Aunt Viv smiled. Good. And of course I'll need pictures. I laughed. Why is this giving me flashbacks to prom night? Aunt Viv laughed, the sound warm and honeyed. If I recall correctly, I didn't get any photos from that night either. Something about you staying home to take care of a sick reindeer? I quirked my lips to one side, surprised she remembered. I guess I do kind of owe you then, huh? Aunt Viv deposited the flute on the counter and then took her place in the center of the small viewing area. You know I think of you as my own daughter, Lumi. I'd love nothing more than to have some photos of you and your handsome prince to put on my mantle. Sterling and Winterspell flew back into the room, a garment bag floating between them on a typhoon of fairy dust. Aunt Viv grabbed the hanger and placed it on a peg beside the mirrors. She removed the gown from the bag and held it out for me to inspect. It was a rich emerald green with a princess neckline, a detail not lost on me, and off-the-shoulder sleeves that left the majority of my arms bare. There will be gloves, of course, Aunt Viv added. A tiara, too, should you want to lean into the theme. I smiled. I think we can skip that part. The gloves sound nice, though. Winterspell flew off to one side of the shop and returned with a pair of velvet black gloves that would go up just past my elbows. With my general stamp of approval given, I was ushered into a dressing room where I slipped on the dress before returning to the front of the shop for Aunt Viv's careful inspection. Sterling placed pins along the hem, neckline, and waist as Aunt Viv made verbal notes. When she was satisfied, I changed back into my winter clothes and prepared to leave. Before I could say goodbye, Aunt Viv gave me a knowing glance. I know you're busy, Lumi, but if you have a little extra time, perhaps we should start talking about wedding gown designs. I could open a bottle of champagne. We really should get to it sooner rather than later. You have no idea how long it takes Chantilly lace to get here. Behind her, the pair of fairies were practically vibrating in anticipation. Aunt Viv, I all but groaned. Don't tell me you believe the gossip rags, too. Aunt Viv cocked one dark brow at me as she planted a fist on her ample hip. Oh, come on, Lumi. Everyone who knows anything about the Frost family knows that Corbin isn't the playboy type. It's been a year. Why wouldn't he propose? It makes perfect sense, even without seeing those juicy photos of him at that posh-looking jewelry store. Slowly, I backed away toward the door. I promise you'll be the first to know, but let's put a pin in the wedding plans for now. But Lumi, bye Aunt Viv, gotta run. The North Star Reindeer Sanctuary was bustling with activity when I returned home via a snowmobile taxi service. Mom was still in the North Pole with Klein, so I'd opted to get my own ride home. With my dress sorted, I could return to work. And there was always plenty of it. As I made my way up the driveway to the main house, I realized one of the snowmobiles parked out front belonged to Doc Patches, the North Pole's lead veterinarian, and personal vet to all of the reindeer and other creatures who called the sanctuary home. My pulse spiked as I hurried toward the largest barn. We didn't have any scheduled visits with Doc Patches. Had one of the reindeer gotten sick? Or hurt? Worry roiled through me in waves as I broke into a run. I heard Doc Patch's voice coming from the barn as I threw open the gate to the pasture. One barn door was open, and I could see the lanky elf standing with my dad near Starly's stall. My heart plummeted into my stomach as I rushed inside. "Is she okay?" I exclaimed. Both Dad and Doc Patches turned at my entrance, and Starly's white nose poked over the side of her stall, sniffing the air to see if I'd brought any treats back for her. "Lumi, there you are," Dad said. "I was just about to offer Doc Patches some cocoa while we waited for you." I frowned. Did I mix up one of our appointments? I was usually so on top of things around the farm, but then things had been more frenzied than usual. It was possible something had slipped my mind. "Not at all, Lumi dear," Doc Patches replied, his kindly eyes peering at me from above a pair of half-moon spectacles. I had no idea how old Doc Patches was, but he and Santa Claus, or Chris, as he called him, were rumored to be lifelong friends, and Santa was close to immortal, as I understood it. He stood half a head taller than my dad, who stood about 6 feet, with a wiry frame that moved with a grace that belied his advanced years. "I'm afraid I need your assistance. Do you have a few moments?" I glanced at my dad. He offered a slight shrug. Whatever it was Doc Patches needed, he hadn't seemed to fill him in. Of course. What is it? Doc Patches stroked a knobby but capable hand down Starly's nose as she continued sniffing the air expectantly. It's rather a delicate matter, you see. Oh, where to start? The elf heaved a sigh, then glanced up at me. Lumi, dear, have you ever heard of ice dragons? I frowned. Yes, or at least the stories about them. They're all extinct now, aren't they? Not extinct, just incredibly rare, Dad interjected. Doc Patches nodded. It is estimated there are only a few of them left in the world. To the east of the Frost Kingdom, there is a group of witches and wizards protecting the only known roost. Protecting them? I frowned. Who would try going up against a dragon? It would be a death sentence. That's just it, Doc Patches replied. It's more that they protect would-be treasure seekers from themselves. The ice dragons don't breathe fire. As their name implies, they breathe ice, stronger than any other kind of ice. It's hard, like crystal or diamond. Something clicked in my mind, and I nodded. Oh, yes! I've seen it before, actually. There was a magazine article some years ago about a pair of hikers who found a cave with these glittering shards. They were beautiful, almost like sculptures. Doc Patches nodded. Precisely. They're called ice flames. It is unusual to find them intact, and those that have been recovered are considered pieces of art. Sculptures. Some of them have even been displayed in museums. The photos I saw were quite beautiful. I smiled as Starly snuffled around my coat pocket. She knew me all too well. I unzipped the pocket and pulled out one of the small candy canes I had stashed there. I imagine they cost a pretty penny, too, I added, returning my focus to Doc Patches. He worked his mitten-clad hands together. The mittens looked crocheted, likely the handiwork of his sweet wife. They are quite pricey indeed, he agreed. Which brings me to my quandary. I frowned again, more confused than ever. To make a long story short, Doc Patches continued, a couple of months ago, Chris hosted several dignitaries and ambassadors from all over the world. It's something he does every year as part of his preparations for the annual ride. One of the ambassadors traveled with his beloved canine companion, and somewhere along the way, the poor thing got into the candy factory and gorged himself silly on chocolate, which, as you know, can be quite dangerous. Chris called for me, and I was able to save the dog's life. Now, the ambassador thanked me profusely and offered to pay me a large sum of money, which I refused. I was merely doing my job. And then, a few weeks ago, a shipment arrived at the clinic. Inside there was an ice flame, about 10 inches long, perfectly preserved. It turned out the ambassador was from the very kingdom where the last known ice dragons live, and he sent the sculpture to me as a token of his thanks. Beside the elf, my dad's brows peaked. He let out a low whistle. That's quite the token. Doc Patches gave a nervous bobble of his head, his hands still wringing together. The missus was particularly taken by it, and I told her she should keep it on the desk at the clinic. It's quite a conversation piece, as you can imagine. But 2 nights ago, the sculpture was stolen. It was there when the missus locked up, and gone by the morning. That's awful. I'm so sorry to hear that, I replied, though I was still unsure why Doc Patches felt the need to come all the way to the sanctuary to tell me the story. The elf looked at me. His normally sparkling blue eyes seemed somewhat dimmed. I was hoping you could help me recover the bauble. Me? My brows rose, then quickly lowered as they furrowed together. Why me? I mean, I don't mean to be rude, Doc Patches, but I'm not sure what made you think I could help with something like this. Wouldn't the North Pole Police or even Santa's private security forces be better suited to recovering the sculpture? Doc Patches shifted his attention to Starly's fuzzy nose for a long moment before replying. Under normal circumstances, yes. However, I'd like to keep this quiet until I know for certain. He looked at me once more, his expression more grave than before. Lomi, I know you're busy here at the sanctuary, but I know you have a knack for these kind of things. Why, you found Rudolph and Jack Frost last Christmas. Then there was that ordeal with the frost pixies and the laced candy canes this summer. A tiny smile plucked at the corners of my lips. Well, maybe so, but I won't be hanging my shingle out to start a private investigation firm anytime soon. Doc Patches chuckled. No, I wouldn't think so. Still, you can see why I'd come to you with this matter. My smile faded, and I shook my head. I'm sorry, not really. Doc Patches bobbled his head. All right, well, you see, my suspicion is that my grandson, Eli, is the one who took the ice flame. Your grandson? Well, my great. The elf stopped and smiled, a familiar twinkle glimmering in his eye for a quick moment. You get the idea. Elves have quite long lives. What makes you think Eli took the sculpture? Dad asked. He's only just moved to the North Pole a few months ago, Doc Patches began. His mother feared he was falling in with a rough crowd and thought some distance might do him some good. And, well, you can't get much farther than the pole now, can you? Fair enough, Dad replied, before gesturing for the elf to continue. Anyway, he moved in with me and the missus. We even got him to come work at the clinic. He doesn't have much work experience, so it's been simple office tasks, while we can get him trained up with some general animal care knowledge. I thought things were going fairly well, all things considered. He even made some new friends. But, well, I'm afraid his mother might have been right about his taste in companions. I frowned. The North Pole was much bigger than Holiday Haven, and with a larger population there was also an uptick in mischief. Still, it wasn't like the North Pole was some kind of Arctic hideaway for hardened criminals. Doc Patches exhaled, his narrow shoulder caving in as he sagged forward. Eli came to me last week, asking about a possible advance on his paycheck. The trouble was he missed 2 of his shifts, and the one he bothered to show up for he was distant and barely accomplished anything. When I tried to broach the subject, he got rather defensive and argumentative. I told him that I couldn't pay him for hours he didn't work. The missus thought some space might do us all some good, so she gave Eli the keys to our condo here in Holiday Haven to use for the weekend. We don't use it much anymore, but with the clinic and everything. But we've held on to it all these years to have a place for visitors to stay when they come into town. Anyway, Eli left in a huff, and when we opened the clinic on Monday, we found the sculpture was missing. So, you think Eli took it as some kind of payback? I asked. It's worth quite the sum. Perhaps he thought he could sell it and make some quick money. For all I know, he's left town altogether. I went to the condo to look for him, and all of his things were gone. I left a note, but he hasn't called. And you don't want to sick the NPPD on him because he's family, I said, the pieces clicking together. Personally, I thought it sounded like a brush with the law might knock some sense into the youngster's head. But then I could also understand Doc Patch's point of view. No one had been hurt. Not to mention, he probably didn't want to call his granddaughter and explain that he'd had her son thrown into the pokey.
It's all rather delicate,
the elf confirmed.
If you could find him, you might be able to convince him to come back and make things right.
I'll see what I can do, I told the elf, stopping short of making any kind of promise. As much as I wanted to help, I figured my odds of getting to the bottom of this were slim to none. But maybe there was still time for a Yuletide miracle. 3. After declining a dinner invitation, Doc Patches departed on his snowmobile, heading back to his home in the North Pole. Before saying goodbye, he'd given me a photo of Eli, the address to the condo in town, and the first names of some of Eli's new friends. It wasn't much to go on, but I thanked him for the information and told him I would call if I found anything. Dad and I watched the snowmobile's lights fade into the night from under the eaves of the barn. When the sound of the engine died down, Dad turned to look at me with a bemused smile. You promise you won't go and set up some kind of super spy agency in the pole when all of this is done? Smiling, I rolled my eyes. Don't worry, Dad. I'm not planning on leaving the farm anytime soon. I'd make a terrible spy anyways. I tripped over a bucket of groats and woke up half the reindeer this morning in my hurry to finish chores. Just checking. Dad chuckled softly. It does seem like a lot has changed in the last year. I suppose that's true. I wrapped my arms around myself. I was still bundled up from my trip into town, but now that the sun had gone down, the temperature was rapidly dropping. The reindeer were all bedded down, ready to sleep, and I was looking forward to going to my cottage and getting into my fuzziest pair of pajamas. They're good changes, Dad hurried to add. Your mother and I both think you and Prince Corbin make for a good couple. I smiled. It's just Corbin, Dad. You know he gets all twitchy when you and Mom call him by his title. Right, sorry. It's what your mother always says, so I guess it's stuck. Well, that's because she likes to brag to all of her North Pole friends, I replied with a small shake of my head. She does enjoy that, Dad agreed with a laugh. A little too much, I added. Even if he weren't a prince, we'd still both be thrilled for you, Lumi. It's been nice to see you so happy lately. I glanced up, a little surprised by his statement. What do you mean? I was happy before I met Corbin, too. Dad draped an arm over my shoulders and pulled me into his side for a brief moment. I guess what I mean is, it's nice that you have someone to share your life with. Life out here on the farm can get kind of lonely sometimes. He paused, and his smile turned wistful as he stared out over the snow-covered driveway. When I first met your mother, I wasn't sure that I could convince her to come live with me here on the farm. He chuckled to himself. I was head over heels for her from the start. But this way of life isn't for everyone. I knew I wanted someone who could share it with me. It makes the long, cold days more bearable to know you have someone waiting inside with a warm hug. I nodded, but my brow furrowed. I know it worked out, and that Mom handles a lot of stuff around here, even if she isn't out in coveralls with a shovel. But do you ever wish she was more hands-on? Dad considered my question for a moment, then shook his head. No, I'd say it all worked out exactly as it was meant to. She turned this place into an actual business and created this magical wonderland we get to share with the world every year at Christmas time. When my parents ran the place, it wasn't open to the public, other than for specific occasions, mostly at Santa's request. All of the funding came from donations and sponsors, and while those programs are still alive and well, there is no way we would have been able to expand and help more animals without the revenue from the visitor events in the winter. And that's all your mom's doing. I didn't know that. I smiled up at the farmhouse where my parents lived, where I'd grown up. The lights on the first level were aglow, and smoke billowed out from the chimney. The inside was all decked out for Christmas, with fresh garlands and a 10-foot tree in the living room, so tall the tip of the star nearly hit the ceiling. The stockings were already hung on the mantel, waiting for Santa's visit. Decorating the house was always one of Mom's favorite traditions. Even now, with Stephen, Klein, and me all grown up and living on our own, we still gathered to help. It was even better now, with my niece and nephew there to carry it on. Corbin had even come this year to help. My heart swelled at the memory of him picking up my niece to help her place a prized ornament along the top boughs of the tree. He melded so well with my family. A seamless fit. I glanced over at my dad. "When did you know that Mom would come around to the idea of life out here on the farm?" He smiled. "It was at Christmas time, actually. I brought her home to meet your grandparents for the first time. I think it was a week or so before Christmas Day. I took her around and introduced her to the reindeer and showed her the property." He paused to laugh at the memory. I started to panic because she wasn't saying much, just kind of nodding politely as I talked. I thought for sure she was trying to find a way to let me down gently, right there in the middle of the pasture. Anyway, we went inside and had dinner. Afterward, when I was driving her back to the train station, she asked me a few questions about the operations side of things. I wasn't really sure what she was getting at, but by the time we got to the station, she'd basically whipped up a mental business plan of all these ways we could be utilizing the property. I laughed. "Sounds like Mom." Dad grinned up at the house. "I proposed to her 2 weeks later, and she said yes." I linked my arm through his. And the rest, as they say, is history. Dad looked at me, his expression still warm but slightly more serious. "You'll figure it out too, Lumi. And if that means you need to leave this place someday, don't worry about the sanctuary. We would miss you terribly and expect you to come home as often as you could to visit. But don't let your love for this place keep you from what it is you're meant to do. And believe me, that woman in there is more than capable of figuring out a way to keep this place going for decades to come." My throat clogged, and I nodded, unable to find the right words, even if I could manage to get them out. Dad patted the back of my hand. "Now what would you say to that dinner invitation? Surely a home-cooked meal is better than whatever you've got in your freezer down at your cottage." I laughed softly and agreed. My fuzzy pajamas could wait. We were halfway through my mom's pumpkin lasagna soup when there was a knock at the door. Dad got up, linen napkin still in hand, and went to answer it. A familiar male voice replied to his greeting, and I jumped out of my chair to race into the living room. "Corbin?" A broad smile met me, stretched across a chiseled face. "There you are. I was just down at your cottage." He thumbed over his shoulder. Come in, I said, grabbing for his hand. Dad smiled and shut the front door. "Would you like me to dish you up some soup, Corbin?" Corbin wrapped an arm around my waist as his gaze followed my dad, crossing back through the living room. "If that's what I'm smelling, then yes, please." Dad chuckled. "Coming right up." When he was out of sight, Corbin leaned down and kissed me like a sailor who'd been gone at sea for too long. A breathless, fervent kiss that made my knees weak and my cheeks twinge with heat. It ended all too soon and left me beaming up at him. "What are you doing here? I thought you were busy at the castle." He laced his fingers with mine as he shrugged one shoulder. "I moved some things around. I hated that I canceled on you earlier." "Well, I'm glad you're here, but I understand why you had to change our plans this afternoon. It happens." Granted, it had been happening a lot lately, but there were a lot of things out of his control. Not to mention my own schedule had been a little packed lately with all of the holiday visitors. "Are you busy tonight? I didn't realize you were having dinner with your parents." "Oh, it's not a formal thing. They offered, and I can't say no to my mom's cooking." I smiled. I was planning on going home afterward. Although, something kind of weird did happen when I got home from my dress fitting. I quickly filled him in on the situation with Doc Patches, and then led the way to the dining room where my parents had set out an extra bowl of soup. My mom greeted Corbin like he was, well, a prince, and immediately began fussing over him, making sure he had enough bread and butter, that the soup was hot enough. Dad sat back in his chair, one hand resting on his soft beginnings of a tummy, and smiled at the scene. After the meal, and a good bit of small talk, we said goodnight to my parents and headed out. My cottage was one of two built on the property, closer to the back reindeer pasture than the farmhouse. They'd been built several years ago for the full-time caretakers who helped run the sanctuary while my brothers and I were growing up. When we were old enough, Stephen and I stepped in to take those positions, and the caretakers retired and moved closer to town. Stephen and Nicole moved into one of them not long after they married, but moved to Holiday Haven proper once they had their second child. I moved into the other cottage when I hit 19. Then, when Stephen and Nicole separated, he moved back home, and we became neighbors. The cottage wasn't anything special, but it was cozy and small enough I could keep a handle on the housework without too much trouble. I appreciated it all the more now that I had a serious boyfriend. He liked my parents, but it was nice to have a place to go where we could be alone and not feel like we were canoodling in a fishbowl. Sugarplum, my familiar, greeted me from his basket when I opened the front door. He was burrowed into a fleece blanket, so that all I could see was his black nose and whiskers sticking out. "There you are! I've been freezing my cottontail off." "Evening to you, too," I said with a smile. Sugarplum lifted his nose from the side of the wicker basket at the sound of Corbin's boots on the floorboards. With a slight shake of his head, he revealed his furry face and blinked. "Oh, hello, Corbin." I set about making a fire while Corbin stashed a glass container of leftover soup in my fridge. The cottage had electricity, but the heat system sometimes got a little finicky. I knew I needed to get it fixed, but this time of year I usually kept a fire going, and given the square footage of the place, it did the job quite nicely. However, on the days I had errands in town, I didn't risk leaving one burning, much to Sugarplum's chagrin. "I'm surprised you weren't up at the main house," I told the hare, as I rubbed my hands together in front of the fledgling flames. "I was next door with Stephen and the kids up until I heard Doc Patch's snowmobile drive away. I figured you'd be down sooner rather than later," the hare replied, still a little miffed. I didn't bother pointing out that he could have simply gone back to Stephen's to wait. "Well, it should warm up in no time. Did you eat?" The hare's nose twitched curiously. "That depends. Did you bring me something from town?" With a laugh, I stood up and dug into my coat pocket. "I might have picked up some sugared date balls from that booth you like at the market." Sugarplum leaped over the side of his basket and began thumping around my feet in small circles. "Wow, that good, huh?" Corbin asked with a laugh. Smiling, I stooped over and deposited 2 of the treats on the wood floor. "Forgive me?" I asked. Sugarplum's whiskers and nose were twitching like mad as he gobbled up the first of the sticky treats. "I'll take that as a yes." I laughed again as I crossed to the sink to wash my fingertips. "Sometimes I feel like a walking vending machine." Corbin chuckled and removed his boots. "Yeah, you better not tell Uller there are snacks available." "Is he in the barn?" I asked as I dried my hands. I hadn't seen Corbin's winged horse on our walk to the cottage. "Yeah, he trotted right in like he owns the place," Corbin replied with a grin. "He's getting pretty comfortable around here." I smiled and leaned back against the edge of the counter, watching as Corbin shrugged out of his thick coat. Underneath, he wore a cable-knit sweater in a cerulean blue color. I recognized it at once, seeing as I'd gifted it to him on his birthday a few months back. "Nice sweater." He smiled and dropped his coat on a peg by the door. "You like it? I got this from a really beautiful woman I met last year." I laughed. "Is that so?" Corbin crossed the room, which took all of 3 strides, and wrapped me up in his arms. My eyes fluttered shut as I rested my cheek against his firm chest. The cottage might be freezing, but in his arms, I was always warm and safe. "How long can you stay?" I asked. "My first meeting tomorrow isn't until 2:00, Corbin replied. I propped my chin on his chest and smiled up at him. "Is that so?" His smile widened. "Uller may have an overnight bag strapped to his saddle." "Well, perhaps we should go get that and settle him into one of the vacant stalls for the night." "Should we pop into town and get some figgy pudding in case we want a midnight snack?" Corbin asked, already going for his coat again. I laughed. "We might have to do that. My cupboards are in desperate need of restocking. Although we can't stay up too late, there's a gingerbread house contest in town tomorrow morning. I'm on ante duty while Stephen is out getting some Christmas shopping done, and the kids want to enter." "I haven't made a gingerbread house since I was a kid myself," Corbin replied as he zipped up his coat. "Sounds fun." I arched an eyebrow. "Really?" "Sure, why not?" Corbin laughed at my bemused expression. "Now come on, before it gets any colder out there." 4. The Figgy Pudding Factory was a recent addition to the cozy town of Holiday Haven. Typically, the residents frowned on chain shops or restaurants, but when the Figgy Pudding Factory decided to expand from their flagship location in the North Pole, the townsfolk had been surprisingly welcoming. I suspected that had to do with their assortment of sugary treats, served in huge portions on the cheap. They had other food items available too, but most people came solely for the dessert. Corbin and I flew into town on Uller's back. Starly was still resting from her day playing My Little Pony with the visiting children. I didn't mind riding behind Corbin. It was warmer and more romantic than flying separately. And while we were getting more time together than I'd expected, I still wanted to soak in every moment as much as I could. The flight took all of 10 minutes before we landed in the parking lot outside the restaurant. It was peak dinner hours, and judging by the number of snowmobiles, carriages, and horses out front, things inside were as busy as ever. With a sigh, I dismounted from the large horse and landed on the shoveled asphalt. I never say this, but I kind of can't wait for Christmas to be over this year, I said. I'm ready for things to go back to normal around here. Corbin smiled as he tied Uller's reins to a candy-striped hitching post beside a painted mare. I think that's how everyone living in a tourist town feels at some point. You know, you're always welcome to escape to the Frost Kingdom if you need some peace and quiet. We get our share of visitors, but we can't compete with the draw of Santa Claus. Believe me, it's tempting. Corbin took my hand, and we went to join the throng of people waiting inside the restaurant's lobby. Luckily, there was a counter specifically to order dessert to go, so we didn't have to wait to be seated to place our order. The establishment's name was a little deceiving. There were a few variations on the classic figgy pudding, but they made up the minority of the sweet offerings. Instead, the menu boasted over 20 varieties of puddings, custards, and mousses. With wide eyes and rumbling bellies, we perused the glass case, ranking our favorites before finally reaching a decision. Corbin placed the order, paid, and received a paper ticket with a number. They said about 5 minutes, he said, as he came to join me at the fringe of the crowded lobby space. I can taste the banana cream already. So tell me more about this gingerbread competition, he said as he took my hand. What are the prizes like? I laughed. I think the grand prize winner gets a ride in Santa's sleigh, which, admittedly, is pretty cool. But seeing as how you're a prince and all that, you could probably go for a spin anytime you'd like. Aha. Yeah. Afraid I checked that off the old bucket list when I was 10 or 11, Corbin replied with a chuckle. I remember Jack froze a bunch of reindeer droppings while we waited for Santa, and then he flung them out like frozen peas at people as we flew by. I grimaced. Yikes. Somehow I was the one who got into trouble when we got home. Corbin scoffed. It felt like Corbin had more to say on the matter, but he pushed it aside. His relationship with his father was dicey, even more so recently as his father was nearing the end of his days. Well, if you want to go all out, I'm sure you could whip up the winning gingerbread house. I'll mainly be trying to keep the kiddos from eating too many of their decorating supplies. My brother's ex-wife won't be happy if I get them too spun up on sugar before she picks them up. Corbin smiled again, and my heart warmed. It sounds fun. I'm glad I cleared my morning meetings. A teen at the dessert counter called out a number, and Corbin perked up. That's us. Be right back. I glanced over my shoulder, looking for a restroom, and frowned at a young man speaking with a red-headed woman near a pair of wooden double doors. He looked familiar, but I couldn't place him. The pair shook hands, and when the man smiled, I realized where I'd seen him. With a jolt, I dug into my pocket and pulled out the small photo Doc Patches had given me before leaving. His great-grandson Eli stared back at me, smiling for the camera. It looked like a professional photographer had taken the shot against a plain blue backdrop, like the kind used for a license or identification badge. Glancing up, I compared the two and decided my instincts were right. There, some 20 paces away, was Doc Patch's missing grandson and possible thief. Corbin came back over to me, a colorful paper bag in one hand. All set? He asked. I held up the photo. That's him, over there. Eli Patches, whatever Doc Patch's real last name is. Corbin considered the photo and the young man. His eyes narrowed on the second pass. Then he inclined his head. Looks like it. Remind me what it is you want with him? Doc Patches thinks he swiped this really expensive sculpture from the clinic, I said, keeping my voice low. Across the room, Eli was on the move. He waved at the red-headed woman and began making his way to the front of the restaurant. Come on, I said, tugging at Corbin's sleeve. Let's follow him and see where he goes. If he heads back to Doc Patch's condo, we can call him and let him know. Corbin followed me out of the restaurant, and we kept one set of eyes on Eli as we walked to the spot where Uller was tethered. The young elf was headed to the other end of the lot. He stepped into the glow of a garland-wrapped lamppost and went to stand beside a sign mapping out the public transit routes. We climbed onto Uller's back, and Corbin guided the winged horse across the lot on foot. The horse tossed his head and flapped his wings, clearly not happy that we weren't getting back into the sky. We obliged the horse's wishes as soon as Eli hopped aboard a red cable car. I clutched the bag of puddings to my chest as we soared into the clouds, careful to keep an eye on the cable car's path. The car made several stops as it whizzed through the main drag through town. Corbin urged Uller to drop down at each stop so we could check for signs of Eli. Finally, when the car was about to reach the end of its route, I spotted the young elf's blue coat and red stocking cap. There he is, I said, pointing down at the snow-covered streets. Corbin spoke to Uller, and the horse began his descent. Holiday Haven wasn't a huge place, but there were places on the outer edges of town that I wasn't as familiar with, in comparison to the town square and main streets of shops and restaurants. Eli's stop on the tram's route fell in one of those muddled parts of my geographic memory. A series of warehouses stood in a line, surrounded by a large parking lot. Things were quiet this time of the evening, and apart from a half-dozen snowmobiles in the lot between two buildings, there didn't appear to be anyone around. There also wasn't a great spot for Uller to land without drawing the elf's attention. A winged horse wasn't a common sight in Holiday Haven in general, and most of the townspeople knew who Uller was, as well as his owner. Corbin seemed to be on the same wavelength as me, and guided the horse into a silent lap around the end of the street as we waited to see where Eli was heading. A set of metal doors opened along the side of the middle building, and a few voices called out greetings to Eli as he approached. The elf held up a gloved hand and waved. Corbin took that as our cue, and we swooped around the corner of the adjacent building before directing Uller to land. We dismounted quickly and went to the corner to peek out at the small gathering. Eli stood with two other guys, who all looked around the same age as him, but then I wasn't sure how old Eli actually was. Elves and all that. One of the guys stood a little taller than Eli, which was saying something, as it appeared the young elf took after his great-grandfather in the height department. I shifted my attention to assess the third man, and gasped softly. "What?" Corbin whispered near my ear. "What's wrong?" "Nothing," I replied softly, giving a clear shake of my head. "It's just that I know one of them. See the guy there with the fur-trimmed jacket and the red gloves?" Corbin nodded. "Who is he?" "His name is Sven. He used to work for my family at the sanctuary." I smiled as I peered over my shoulder at Corbin. My mom was trying to set me up with him for last year's Yule Ball. Corbin frowned. "Is that right?" I stifled a giggle. He's a nice guy. He left the sanctuary to start his own business in the pole, but I guess it didn't work out. When I saw him last winter, he said he'd recently moved back to Holiday Haven. "Any idea what this place is? I don't see any kind of signs," Corbin asked. I shook my head. "Not specifically, no. If I had to guess, I'd say some kind of shipping facility, or maybe storehouses for products coming and going to and from the pole." Before we could speculate further, a distant rumble gave me pause. Corbin heard it too. Slowly, our eyes swiveled toward one another. When they met, I grimaced. "You don't think that's..." A spirited whoop echoed through the street, chasing away any doubt. Corbin scowled. "Jack." "St. Nicholas preserve us all," I muttered. 5. A gust of magic swept through the frozen parking lot, and in the blink of an eye, a huge ramp of solid ice appeared. Jack's infamous snowmobile wasn't far behind. With a manic cackle, Jack roared into sight, barreling down the icy incline. "Frostcore!" he yelled as he hurtled the snowmobile onto the ramp's slick edge. He flew off the end with another whoop, and the moonlight glinted off the frost wyverns painted on the side of the snowmobile as he sailed by. Sven, Eli, and the third young man all burst into sycophantic applause as Jack stuck the landing and pumped his arms over his head. Corbin swore. Grinning from ear to ear, Jack killed the engine and hopped off his snowmobile. With another snap of his fingers, the icy ramp exploded into a flurry of snowflakes. "What's up, my snowman? Staying frosty?" I scrunched my nose. Staying frosty? Who says that? "I'm never going to get this knucklehead married off," Corbin muttered. I suppressed a grin. "It's going to take a really special lady to take on that particular project." Corbin scrubbed a hand down his face. Across the lot, Jack was bumping fists with his friends. Were they out here so Jack could show off his flashy toy? Eli hadn't come with his own snowmobile, but Sven and the other guy maybe had. Perhaps they were meeting for some kind of street race. Jack had promised to stop terrorizing the streets and residential sectors of Holiday Haven, but a shuttered industrial area was technically available for his use. It's not like the HHPD would bother him either way. He was too popular. Anytime they tried to shut down his antics in the past, they ended up with an unhappy crowd of superfans heckling them. And that was back before he'd been crowned king. As it was, Jack was invincible. At least, against everyone other than his brother, who looked ready to twist him up like a pretzel and leave him wrapped around a lamppost. I placed a hand on Corbin's arm, but it was too late. He was already in motion, stalking toward the four men with purposeful strides across the snow. "What the fa-la-la is going on here?" he demanded. Jack jolted at the sound of his brother's gruff voice, but quickly recovered and slapped on his signature half-cocked grin. Corby, what a surprise! I was wondering where you'd run off to. I should have known you'd be here in town, visiting your little snickerdoodle, no doubt. Jack peered past his brother's shoulder, spotted me, and twinkled his fingers. Hello, Lumi. You're looking lovely, as usual. You getting bored of this killjoy yet? Jack, Corbin growled. I sighed and came over to join them, still clutching the bag from the figgy pudding factory to my chest. Jack's brows lifted when he saw the logo. Ooh, I do hope you brought me something. Lumi? Sven said. I gave him a polite smile. Hi, Sven, it's nice to see you. What are you doing out here? He asked. Yes, I'd like to know that too, Jack interjected, shifting his attention back to Corbin. Don't tell me you put one of those tracking devices on my snowmobile again. I thought we were past all of that. Corbin didn't take the bait. Where's your security detail, Jack? Jack huffed a melodramatic sigh and tossed his hands into the air. I wanted a night out with the boys. Surely, as king, that's within my rights. Corbin's jaw flexed. Let's have a word in private. Jack gave a long-suffering look to his companions before following his brother a few yards away. Sven pocketed his hands and looked at me. How have you been? How are things at the sanctuary? Good, thanks. Busier than usual, especially since we have our big sponsor appreciation dinner this weekend. Oh, yeah. I was meaning to come, but forgot to send my RSVP in time, Sven replied. I tilted my head. You're one of the sponsors? He laughed. Of course. Oh, I didn't mean it that way. It's just, I didn't remember seeing your name on the list. But I guess that makes sense. I didn't see the invitation list, just the confirmed attendees. You know you're always welcome, RSVP or not. Sven smiled as he inclined his head. I appreciate that. I just might stop by then. I gestured past him to the building. What is this place anyway? Seems like Wet Your Wassail would make for a better weeknight hangout spot. Sven chuckled. Yeah, probably. But Charlene is allergic to all things holly jolly. Charlene? I frowned. She used to run her business out of the break room, but now that it's turned a little too festive, she moved operations here, Sven replied. Suddenly, I conjured the image of a harsh but beautiful woman with purple hair, pale skin, and teeth so white and pointed they might be mistaken for vampire fangs. Charlene was a frost harpy, and she ran an underground gambling ring in Holiday Haven. Corbin and I had confronted her last winter when we were out looking for Jack. I caught a glance across the lot to where Corbin and Jack were arguing. What was he doing, getting mixed up with Charlene again? Last I heard, he owed her the keys to his beloved snowmobile. Things must have changed if she was allowing him entry to her private games again. Of course, that probably had something to do with the fact that he now had an entire kingdom's treasury at his disposal. No wonder Corbin was boiling over. Exhaling, I shifted my attention back to the three, Eli in particular. I plastered on my most charming smile and extended my hand toward the elf. I'm so sorry. How rude of me not to introduce myself. I'm Lumi Northrop. Eli looked taken aback, but quickly accepted my hand. Eli Parsons. Parsons? Was that perhaps a more subtle version of Patches? Meant to blend in among the non-magic world? Elves like Eli could blend in with humans with a few tricks. There were illusion charms that could hide pointed ears and dial back the supernaturally vibrant eye coloring elves generally had. In Eli's case, his eyes were much like his great-grandfather's, a sparkling blue that were a tad too bright to pass as human. The other young man introduced himself after Eli and I shook hands. Paul Carson, he said. I know your dad, actually. I work at the hardware store here in town. Oh, yeah. Now that you mention it, you do look familiar. It's nice to officially meet you. Paul smiled and shook my hand. Likewise. So you're all here for a poker game? I asked, as I slipped my gloved hands back into my coat pockets. It's a once-a-week thing, Sven replied. We play every Wednesday night. I cast another glance over my shoulder. Corbin was listening to Jack speak, and from the set of his scruff-covered jawline, he didn't like any of the words coming out of his brother's mouth. Wincing, I turned back to Sven, Paul, and Eli. Does Jack come every week? He's been coming pretty regularly for the past few months, Sven told me. He and Charlene had some beef back at the beginning of the year, Paul interjected, but they sorted it out this summer and he started coming around again. Eli smiled. I'm new to town, but I gotta say, telling my buddies back home that I play poker with the Jack Frost is pretty cool. I zeroed in on the elf. Where are you from? Vail, Colorado. It's a normie town, but there are lots of supernaturals there. I've never been, but from what I've seen, it seems like transitioning to live up here wouldn't be too hard. Weather-wise, I mean. Eli laughed. Yeah, I'm used to the snow, that's for sure. Sven gestured at the elf. Eli is actually Doc Patch's grandson, he explained. Lumi works with Doc. I swallowed hard and kept my expression neutral. Eli had no reason to suspect me of anything, but it still felt nerve-wracking to have Doc Patches brought up in the conversation. Eli's eyes dimmed a little as he bobbed his head. Oh, that's cool. You know, Lumi, I'm working at Doc Patch's clinic these days, Sven continued. I'm surprised I haven't seen you there lately. Oh, I didn't realize. I thought you were back here in Holiday Haven. I am. I've been commuting. It's a bit of a trek, but it's nice to be working around animals again. All right, snowmen, let's do this thing. Jack's voice boomed from the other end of the lot. His jovial smile was back in place, his eyes sparkling as he rubbed his hands together. I noticed he wasn't wearing gloves, but then I guess they would get in the way of his magic. Corbin followed in his brother's wake, his expression even darker than before. It was good to see you, I told Sven. Jack winked at me as he passed. Always a treat, Lumi. I wasn't... Oh, never mind. Yes, Jack, good to see you too. I hope old Corby isn't too cranky the rest of the night, Jack added, laughing as he strolled past the others on his way to the warehouse doors. You know, you can always ditch him and come play a few hands with us if you need an escape. I rolled my eyes. Thanks, I'll keep that in mind. Sven offered me a smile. Good night, Lumi. See you Saturday? See you then. The four went inside the warehouse, leaving Corbin and me alone. So, that looked like a productive conversation, I said, as I turned toward him. Good thing we have all this pudding. You can stress eat and wait for the serotonin to kick in. It's going to take more than a bowl of pudding to fix this, Corbin replied bitterly, still staring at the doors. After a moment, he broke away and rubbed a hand over the back of his neck. Every time I think he's going to get it together, he has to go and prove me wrong. I know, he's a royal pain. Literally. But it could be worse, right? I mean, he's just playing poker with some friends. Well, and a greedy frost harpy. But unless he's gambling away the deed to the summer castle or something, it seems pretty harmless overall. Like you said, he needs some kind of outlet. And this is a lot better than his usual. Don't you think? Bar hopping, drunken disorderlies, and being a general womanizer? Yes, I suppose. But that bar is so low, I think ground squirrels would have a hard time limboing underneath it. Corbin sighed. In any case, there's no changing his mind tonight. Let's get going. I've kept you out in the cold too long as it is. I smiled, not bothering to remind him that I spent the majority of my days in the elements. It was cold, and a cozy blanket and a crackling fire sounded far better than standing in a frozen parking lot. Besides, it was nice to feel taken care of. Then I remembered what had brought us out here in the first place. For once, it hadn't been Jack's antics. What about Eli? I asked Corbin. Oh, right. He considered the warehouse again. I don't suppose there's much more we can do, unless you want to go in there and outright ask him about the sculpture. I shook my head. I don't think that would work. He isn't likely to spill his guts to a pair of random strangers, even royal ones, I added with a smile. I guess maybe we've found a motive, though, Corbin said, nudging his chin toward the warehouse. Charlene's poker games tend to get pretty high stake. And if Jack is there, well, safe to say the buy-in is outrageous. If Eli got tangled up with the harpy, there's a chance he needs money, fast. Frowning, I nodded in agreement. badly enough to steal from his own grandfather. 6. We walked back to where we'd left Uller. The horse gave a soft whinny, almost like an impatient child eager to go home after a long day at the shopping mall. Corbin sensed it too, and smiled as he ran one hand over the steed's nose. "I know, buddy. We're going." "Someone is ready for dinner," I teased. Corbin laughed as he took the reins. "I'd say so." The sound of metal doors banging shut caught my ear, and I glanced over my shoulder to find Eli exiting the warehouse, a large black duffel bag in one hand. With his free hand, he tossed a pair of keys into the air and caught them with a satisfied grin. He crossed the parking lot and stopped at one of the snowmobiles parked in a row along the front of the building. He strapped the duffel bag in place, using a series of bungee cables, then climbed astride the vehicle and revved the engine to life. I looked up at Corbin, my brow furrowed. Looks like he's not staying for tonight's game after all. "Come on." Corbin mounted Uller and offered me a hand. The tall horse wouldn't be easy to climb, even if he didn't have a pair of large feathered wings in the way, so I gratefully took his hand and hurried to get into the saddle. When I was secured, Corbin nudged Uller with his heels, and we took off. Uller got a running start, then flapped his powerful wings and lifted off the ground. Below, Eli was already pulling out onto the main road, back the same way he'd come on the cable car. We kept up with him, but stayed back far enough he wouldn't notice us. He didn't go far. After a few blocks, he took a side street, went another couple of blocks, and then pulled into a parking space out in front of Holiday Haven's pawn shop, the White Elephant. Corbin had Uller land one block down, so we didn't draw too much attention. I hurried to dismount and scurried closer to the shop. Eli went to the back of the snowmobile, unfastened the duffel bag, and headed inside, all the while whistling a merry little tune. "Doc Patches said the sculpture was about 10 inches long," I told Corbin. "It could easily fit in a bag like that." Corbin ran a hand over his jaw. "This could get awkward, but should we try to stop him?" My feet were already in motion. After a beat, likely long enough for Corbin to tether Uller to something, he joined me just in time to open the shop's door. A jingle bell rang out, and Eli turned to look over his shoulder at the noise. His eyes widened for a moment as he swung around to face us. "This is an odd coincidence," he said cautiously. The White Elephant was packed to the brim with all manner of items. There were jewelry cases galore, shelves overflowing with old books, knickknacks, musical instruments, even some clothing. None of it was well organized or clearly marked. A dwarf named Frances Mabel ran the place, and everyone in town knew she was something of a magpie. Bring her something shiny or unique, and she'd give you more than what it was likely worth. Although tonight there wasn't any sign of the friendly shopkeeper. "Are you following me?" Eli asked. I gestured at the duffel bag. "I think I know what you have in there, Eli." The elf frowned. Okay. And what is it you think I have?" "The ice flame from your grandfather's clinic." Eli blinked. "It's not too late to make this right," I told him. "Your grandfather can help you if you're in some kind of trouble." Eli shook his head, still a little dazed looking. "Listen, lady, you seem nice and all that, but I have no idea what you're talking about." "Doc Patches asked me to help. He's worried about you." Corbin placed a hand on my back. "Yo, Eli, you're just in time for—" A short and stocky young man about Eli's age entered from an open door into the stockroom. He stopped short when he saw Corbin and me standing there. "Oh, I didn't know we had customers. Hang on, I'll go get my mom." The young man disappeared the same way he'd come, leaving us alone with Eli again. Eli looked slightly more panicked than before. "Do you have the ice flame sculpture in that bag?" I asked. "No, of course not. I didn't even know it was missing." Eli came a little closer and tossed the bag up on the counter. With a frustrated sigh, he unzipped it and pulled apart the fabric to reveal an assortment of rolled-up clothing, random toiletries, and a couple of paperback books. "It's just my stuff. I got into an argument with Granddad and decided I didn't want to stay at his condo anymore. So I'm staying here, crashing with some friends tonight." Heat swept over my cheeks as I realized my mistake. "What about the poker game? We saw you at the figgy pudding factory. You didn't have the bag or the snowmobile then." Eli exhaled as he zipped up his bag once more. When he finished, he crossed his arms over his chest. "I'm done with the poker thing. I only went there tonight to get my stuff and collect my winnings. I'm getting out while I'm ahead. I was at an exclusive game last night, played until 2 or 3 in the morning, and crashed out when it was over. The cable cars weren't running anymore, and Charlene's got a couple of nice couches. I was down pretty bad, so when I got up this morning, I decided to get out. I was about to call Sean." He hooked a thumb over his shoulder, indicating the doorway where the half-dwarf had appeared moments earlier, "to see if he'd come pick me up. But before I got the chance, Charlene looped me in for one more game with a few of her whales, as she called them, tourists who come into town this time of year. Anyway, my luck must have turned around because before I knew it, I was rolling. This guy in the circle was all agitated, and when he ran out of chips, he just threw down the keys to his ride. I had a hot hand, so I went all in." Eli paused, unable to hold back a triumphant grin. "I won it all. The money and the snowmobile. Charlene said she'd get it detailed for me while I ran out to run an errand." "So you went to the figgy pudding factory?" I asked. Eli's smile slipped a little. "Yeah, I was filling out a job application." I blinked. "Oh." The young elf sighed. "Whatever my granddad told you, it's probably true. I haven't been making the best choices lately, but I'm trying to turn it around. No more poker nights. I'm going to put my winnings in savings and not touch them. Sure, the guys that play are cool and all, but when I play, I have a hard time stopping. And I know it's not something to mess around with much longer, or I'll end up broke again." Eli straightened and thrust his shoulders back. "I met Sean and his buddy Ricky at the Christmas market last weekend. They have a booth selling custom Dungeons and Dragons merchandise, and they invited me to join their group. When everything hit the fan last night at the poker game, I texted them, and they offered to help." "Eli, I'm sorry about the misunderstanding. I think Doc is just really worried about you. He said he went to the condo to look for you and even left a note, but when you weren't there, well, I think he jumped to the wrong conclusion. He came to me because he didn't want to get the authorities involved. I can't believe he actually hired you to follow me around," Eli said, his tone more of astonishment than disgust. "Wow, I guess he is worried about me after all." "Of course he is." "Well, listen, I'm a long way from perfect, but I'm trying to get it together." The young elf paused and rubbed the back of his neck as he craned around, looking toward the other room where his friend was waiting. "These guys have a good thing going, and they said I could join in. I think it's past time for me to stand on my own 2 feet. I've even got a job interview lined up this week. Ricky's mom manages the figgy pudding factory, and she needs a dishwasher." "Good luck memorizing the menu," Corbin quipped. "That thing's thick enough you could hammer nails with it." I smiled at the young elf. "I hope it works out for you, Eli. Could you do me a favor, though? Call Doc Patches. He's one of the good ones, and he wants to help." Eli glanced down at his shoes as he nodded his reply. "I'll do that. I know I messed up." Corbin clapped him on the shoulder. "It happens to all of us. Family is a tough thing. Believe me, my brother is Jack Frost." Eli chuckled. "Right, he's quite the character." Corbin smiled. "That's one way to put it." I needled him playfully with an elbow. "Be nice, it's Christmas time." What? It's not like he's here, Corbin protested with another grin. Lacing my arm through Corbin's, I started to turn us around, then stopped and glanced back at Eli. One more thing before we go. Do you have any idea who might have swiped the ice flame? Doc Patches said there weren't signs of a forced entry, so whoever took it must have had a key. Eli's smile faded as he considered my question. Pretty much everyone has a key. It's a small staff. Granddad is also a little too trusting. He doesn't exactly keep the place fortified. Can you think of any reason why someone would take it? Is anyone holding some kind of grudge against the clinic or Doc Patches? Eli started to shake his head, then stopped and held up one finger. Wait a sec. There was this girl, a witch, Claudia. Granddad fired her last week. Do you know why? I asked. Eli shifted his weight and reached across his chest to scratch at the opposite arm. Well, if I was a less than satisfactory employee, let's just say Claudia could make me look good. I don't really know what started it all. Granddad told me she'd been with him for over a year, but all of a sudden she started showing up late. She was moody and snappy, even with the clients. I saw her chew out a little old lady fairy when she came in to pick up medicine for her cat. Just exploded out of nowhere on the poor woman. Yikes, that sounds pretty bad. And you have no idea why? Eli shrugged and dropped his hands back to his sides. I heard her arguing with someone on the phone a few times in the supply room. If I had to guess, I'd say it was her husband or boyfriend. So she got fired last week? Any chance she still had her key to the clinic? It seems like she would have had one after being there for a year. I don't know if she turned it in or not, but even if she did, it's pretty easy to make a copy. True. What did she think about the ice flame? Doc Patches said Mrs. Patches liked to keep it on the reception desk. I mean, everyone thought it was pretty cool, I guess. I didn't really get all the fuss, but Sven explained that the thing is like one of those fancy golden eggs the Queen of England collects. Fabergé eggs? I laughed, but figured it was an apt comparison. Yeah, I guess. Eli shook his head. I still can't believe Granddad really thought I would steal from him. Thanks for the information, Eli. I really appreciate it. The young elf gave me a distracted nod. Yeah, sure, no prob. We said goodbye and turned to leave the pawn shop. Eli called after me, and I paused, one hand on the door. Claudia will be in town tomorrow for that big gingerbread competition. It's all she talked about for the past couple of weeks. Well, in between complaining about everything. Maybe you can try asking her about it. Okay. Thanks for the tip. Have a nice night, Eli. Good luck with the job interview. Corbin pushed open the door and we stepped outside. I tugged at the collar of my coat to shield as much of my neck and ears as I could from a chilly gust of wind. So, what do you think? He seems sincere to me. I nodded in agreement. I think so, too. Hopefully he and Doc Patches can sort things out. Corbin cracked a grin. Did you almost say you hope they patch things up? Fighting a laugh, I glowered up at my boyfriend. Maybe? He laughed and squeezed my hand. I swear there's something in the water around here. 7. Aunt Lumi, I want to do the gumdrops, Darian whined, already lunging for the paper cup his sister held in her hands. With a grin, she lifted it over her head, out of her brother's reach, and stuck out her tongue. Lily, come on, don't be like that. I reached for the cup and gently took it from my niece's clutches. You two have to share. The candies can all sit here on the table so you can both reach. Darian grabbed for the cup and managed to spill the gumdrops over the tabletop. With a wicked grin, he popped 2 into his mouth, loudly chewing them in his sister's face. Heat crept over my cheeks. Darian and Lily were normally pretty well behaved, but on the morning of the gingerbread house competition, they'd both woken up grumpy, and rushing them into town hadn't improved their moods. Hey, guys, let's see who can make the straightest line with the frosting. Corbin suggested, as he inserted himself between the warring siblings. He squatted down beside them and picked up a bag of white frosting. I'm pretty lousy at this, so maybe you can help me. Darian swallowed his gumdrops and grabbed his own bag of red icing. It's easy, he declared, his tongue poking out to one side as he screwed up his small face in concentration. Lily, not willing to be outdone, snatched her frosting bag and went to work on the other side of the gingerbread house. When both of the kids were busy, Corbin looked up at me and winked. I decided I was going to have to kiss his handsome face off when we were alone again. The annual competition was thankfully held indoors, inside the same hall where the Yule Ball took place each year. There were several tables set up with all of the supplies. Things had probably been neatly organized and arranged at the start, but over the course of the day, as families rotated through, things got a little messy. The kids didn't seem to mind. They jumped right in, grabbing their share of candies, sprinkles, and frosting tubes as soon as we arrived. Adjacent to the main hall, there was an exhibition room where some of the more extravagant gingerbread creations were on display. I figured we could walk through and check it out once our house was completed. A few seats down from us, another family was working on a castle-like gingerbread house, complete with a hot chocolate moat. Across from them, someone had crafted a miniature version of Santa's sleigh out of candy canes, gumdrops, bits of cookie, and a whole lot of frosting. One of the houses on the front table near the judges was lit up from the inside, like a Christmas version of a jack-o'-lantern. Our entry was definitely not going to take the top spot in the competition, but we managed to put the house together with minimal squabbles over the course of an hour or so. Corbin proved a skilled referee when the kids got snippy with one another. While they put the finishing touches on the house, I excused myself to go and get us a round of cocoa from the table set up at one end of the hall. On the way there, I took my time, looking over the other entries, stopping to chat with a few neighbors and friends. In the back of my mind, I was also keeping my eyes peeled for Claudia. Eli had said she would be competing, and I thought if I could find her, I might be able to ask her some questions about the ice flame. Doc Patches usually made house calls out to the sanctuary whenever we needed him, so I didn't go to the clinic all that often. But I did occasionally have to stop by to pick up some medication or other supplies. I knew most of the staff. If I remembered correctly, Claudia was about average height, with black hair that she kept in a short bob. However, no one matching that description was around the hall. I ordered 4 cocos, grabbed an extra candy cane for Starly, and headed back to the kids, just in time to watch Corbin put the final glob of frosting onto the gingerbread house's roof. Smiling, I set the drink carrier on the table beside it, and the kids dove in eagerly. Careful! You don't want to spill on the new clothes your mom bought you. Why my former sister-in-law thought it was wise to have the kids dress up in new clothes to go to a gingerbread house competition was beyond me. But she would be the one picking them up, and had requested specific outfits in advance. Do we have to go get our pictures taken? Darian asked with a groan. Can't we just go back home with you, Aunt Lumi? Sorry, kiddo. No can do. Your mom will be here in about an hour. I ruffled his dark waves. What kind of pictures are you going to do? Lily sighed. Mom wants us to do family pictures with her new boyfriend, Dave. Judging by the roll of her eyes, she wasn't a fan. I didn't know your mom had a boyfriend. Lily nodded her head and reached for a chocolate-covered pretzel stick. Dad doesn't like him, she said. I winced. It didn't surprise me that Stephen hadn't told me about the new boyfriend. Despite their differences, I knew he still cared about Nicole, and while he wouldn't admit it out loud, I often thought he was holding out hope they would find a way back to each other. I took a sip from my cocoa and absently stroked my fingers through Lily's blonde ponytail. One of the women running the event circled around to comment on our creation. The kids excitedly showed her all of their additions, and she politely smiled and nodded through their presentation. When they finished, she told us where to put the completed house and when to come back for the presentation of the winners that afternoon. We bundled up into our coats and took the kids outside to let them burn off some energy with the other kids out in the town square, most of whom were engaged in a massive snowball fight. Darian and Lily passed me their leftover cocoa and raced into the fray. I set the extra cups on a nearby park bench and then smiled up at Corbin. I hope my little Christmas goblins didn't permanently scare you off having kids someday. He chuckled and looped an arm around my waist. Nah, they're just being kids. If looking after Jack for the majority of my life has prepared me for anything, it's fatherhood. I laughed. Fair enough. If you two weren't famous, no one would suspect you were the younger brother. He smiled. Probably not. I reached up to tuck a stray strand of hair underneath my knit cap to keep it from whipping around in the breeze. I don't like to make excuses for them, but this time of year is hard on them. They end up getting bounced back and forth between my brother and his ex. And then her parents are also divorced, so the kids wind up going to 3 different Thanksgivings and 3 Christmases. Now, apparently, there is a boyfriend in the mix, too. It's just kind of a lot. Corbin gave a thoughtful nod of his head, still watching the kids play in the snow. I can relate to that. Growing up in the royal family, you get pulled in a dozen different directions. Tutors, riding instructors, etiquette class, not to mention attending endless family functions. Sometimes I think my childhood wasn't really much of a childhood at all. I had to grow up too fast. Kids shouldn't have to deal with all of that. I placed my hand over top the one Corbin had resting on my hip as I smiled up at him. Thanks for coming today. It was nice to have an extra set of hands and pair of eyes on them. Of course, any time. He frowned. Well, you know what I mean. Someday I'll figure out a way to pare my schedule back. I didn't want to look at the time. I already knew we were running out. He had to get back to the castle, and as soon as Nicole came to collect the kids, I would need to get back to work, too. At least I'll get to see you this weekend, right? Corbin squeezed me into his side a little tighter as he kissed the side of my head. Definitely. It wasn't long after Corbin left that Nicole came to collect the kids. She was friendly, but ever since the divorce, things felt strained between us. We used to be good friends, oftentimes teaming up against Stephen and Klein during family game nights. She and Stephen had been high school sweethearts, so her history with my family was deeply rooted. After squeezing Darian and Lily goodbye, I went back inside to take a quick tour through the exhibition room and see the more spectacular gingerbread creations. As I crossed through the main hall, I saw Eli at a table with 2 others, laughing together as they drew what appeared to be a large troll onto a slab of gingerbread with green frosting. I smiled to myself as I watched the trio, and when I took another step forward, I didn't check my path and wound up bumping into someone. "Oh, jingle bells, I'm so sorry," I sputtered, only to realize the person I'd run into was Sven. "Hey, Lumi," he said, offering a warm smile. "It's no problem." He was bundled up in a navy blue coat with large buttons down the front and a red scarf tied around his neck. "Are you entering the contest?" he asked. "My niece and nephew did earlier," I replied. "They just left with their mom, so I thought I'd come in and check out the other displays before heading back to the sanctuary. How about you? Do you have some kind of secret artsy streak?" "Oh, no, I was just kind of looking around." He paused and slipped his hands into his pockets, his gaze wandering for a moment before he looked at me again. When he met my eyes again, his expression looked almost pained. "Lumi, there's something I've been wanting to tell you for a while now." Okay? He drew in a shaky breath. "Lumi, I think I'm in love with you." I froze, not even blinking, as the words echoed through my head. Sven hurried to press on. "When my business tanked and I had to move back to my parents' place, I was a mess. But there was a silver lining. You. I used to think about you all the time when I was living in the pole.
So when I bumped into your mom at the market and she thought you might like to go to the Yule Ball with me, well, it felt like maybe there was a reason for the way things went with my business. That maybe I was meant to come back.
My stomach coiled into a ball as I glanced around. We stood alone in the small hallway between the exhibit and the main event space.
I know I'm not a prince,
Sven continued, his cheeks redder than usual,
but I've recently come into some money, and I put an offer down on a house right here in Holiday Haven. I'd be happy to help run your parents' farm, maybe even move there someday. I could take care of you, Lumi. You wouldn't have to change who you are to be with me.
The last words hit me like a smack upside the head, and I took a step backward, my hands going up in front of me to create some space. Sven, please, just stop right there. Sven reached for my wrist.
Lumi, please, he's not right for you.
I tore out of his grasp. With all due respect, you couldn't possibly know that. You and I barely know each other. I mean, sure, we work together at the sanctuary, and I think you're a great guy. You were always well-liked and a hard worker. You have a lot to offer any girl, but I'm happy with Corbin. I love him. At the fringes of the room, a few people had stopped to look, including Eli and his two friends. Heat crept up my throat, and I could only imagine how red and blotchy my face and chest were. Sven, I'm sorry, but I'm not interested. Turning, I hurried out of the hall, not stopping until I was outside on the front steps, gasping in the cold air like I'd just surfaced from underneath a tidal wave. When someone tapped on my shoulder, I nearly jumped out of my skin as I spun around. Expecting Sven, I gasped when I saw a tall elf towering over me. Lumi, are you all right?
Eli,
I breathed, clutching one hand to my chest. You scared me half to death. He took a step back and slipped his hands into the pockets on his jeans. Sorry, I just saw you with Sven and it seemed kind of tense. I exhaled slowly, taking a beat to gather my thoughts. It's fine, I'm fine. He was just... My words trailed off when I realized I wasn't sure how to finish the sentence. Squeezing my eyes closed, I shook my head. He's been a little edgy lately, Eli said. I've seen it happen before. People get in over their heads and start doing crazy things. Whatever he said to upset you, I wouldn't take it personally. I opened my eyes and peered up at the elf. What do you mean? Sven's a huge gambling addict. The way he said it made me feel as if it was information I should have already known. I'm not sure how much he owes Charlene, but it's a lot. I frowned. But he just told me he came into some money and that he'd put an offer in on a house. Eli shook his head. He's lying to you. The night I lost big, he was down just as bad. Charlene was threatening to cut him off. Unless... You don't think he could have been the one who... Eli glanced over his shoulder, his expression grave. The doors of the hall burst open, and Sven appeared.
Lumi, please, can you just listen?
I folded my arms. It was you, wasn't it? You're the one who broke in and stole the ice flame from Doc's clinic. Sven reared back, his eyes wild as they bounced from Eli to me and back again.
What? What is he even doing here?
He sputtered. Eli folded his arms and leveled Sven with a hard stare. Did you steal from my granddad to pay your debts to Charlene? Sven backed up a step, but his shoe hit awkwardly and he slipped. With a yelp, he grabbed the railing at the last moment and righted himself.
I don't know what you're talking about.
I pulled my phone out of my pocket. I can call Jack right now and have him find out for me. He and Charlene seem to be pretty friendly again, so I'm sure she'd tell him if you suddenly found a way to settle your account. And unless you've got one heck of a side hustle, I can't see how your job at the clinic is enough to cover your wagers at Charlene's games and buy a house. Sven's eyes flashed, turning dark and menacing.
You don't know what you're talking about.
I can call the Holiday Haven PD if you'd prefer, I said sweetly, pretending to dial. Sven lunged toward me, and given his placement on the stairs, he had the advantage. Eli snapped his fingers, and a crack of magic sent Sven reeling backward. This time he couldn't catch himself in time and landed on his rear. Thanks, I told the elf. He inclined his chin. No problem. You know, I think calling the police is a good idea. Because if they don't deal with you, I will. And while I haven't always given my granddad the respect he deserves, I'm not about to stand by and let someone steal from him. Sven crumpled, dropping his face into his hands.
You may as well, he wailed. My life is already a complete disaster. What difference would being in jail really make? It already feels like I'm in prison.
I glanced at Eli. He rolled his eyes.
Oh, come on, you big baby. It can't be all that bad.
He stomped up the stairs and hauled Sven to his feet with one brisk movement.
Stop the crocodile tears. Where is the ice flame? It's at my parents' house. I've been living with them for the past year since coming back to town. Charlene said she'd take it and clear my debts and even give me some extra. Enough that I could buy a house like I've always wanted.
Sven paused and looked up at me.
I thought that's what you would want, Lumi. It's what you deserve. Someone who can give you the things you need and want in life.
I appreciate that, Sven. But don't try and blame this on me. You made your own choices here.
The only reason I even went to the games was to try and get some dirt on Corbin. Everyone knew Jack played.
A surge of anger spiked through me, and I pursed my lips to keep myself from saying something I'd regret.
Tell you what, Eli said. I know what it's like being in your shoes. I'm not trying to kick you while you're down. If you give me the ice flame and come clean with my granddad, I won't call the police. We can sort this out between ourselves.
I was surprised by Eli's level-headed response. But then, after what he'd told Corbin and me, it made sense. He could relate to the way Sven was feeling, probably better than most.
You're serious?
Sven asked Eli. The elf held up one spindly finger.
You've got to get some help, though. Promise me that, and you've got yourself a deal.
Sven blinked, but he extended his hand toward the elf and nodded in earnest.
I promise.
Good. Eli smiled and clapped Sven on the shoulder.
Besides, that's kind of the spirit of this whole place, isn't it? Forgiveness and good cheer.
I couldn't help but smile at him. You know, I couldn't have said it better myself. 8. It was the night before the big sponsor appreciation banquet, and everyone gathered at the farmhouse for dinner after a long day of preparations. No one had the energy left to cook, so my mom ordered pizza and Stephen picked it up on his way home with the kids. We ate in the living room, a rare treat in the Northrop household, and when we finished, I volunteered to wash the plates we'd used. Mom came to join me while Dad and Stephen got the kids settled in with a movie. We were just about done when Sugar Plum leaped through the cat flap built into the back door and shook off a dusting of fresh snow. "Oh, Sugar Plum," Mom scolded. "Can't you do that outside?" The hare glanced down at himself, as though unsure what she meant. After a moment, he twitched his nose and looked up at me. "Luby, Corbin is looking for you. He's out in the maid barn." "Corbin's here?" I laughed and set down the plate I'd been drying. I guess he was serious about shoveling stalls. "Go on," Mom said, patting me on the hip to shoo me away from the sink. "I'll finish up in here." "Thanks for the pizza," I said, as I dried off my hands. "I'll see you bright and early." Mom smiled. "It's going to be a big day." I said goodnight to everyone as I bundled into my coat, then followed Sugar Plum down to the barn. Uller was standing in an open stall, happily munching hay. He offered me a whinny as a greeting, and I stopped to run a hand down his nose. "Good to see you, boy." A titter rang out from the other side of the barn, and I left the stall to see what was going on. "Don't tell me the pixies got into some weird candy again," I muttered. "That is absolutely the last thing we need." Sugarplum scampered down the aisleway between the stalls. "The pixies are fine," he said. "Come and see." Alongside the wall, to the right of the barn doors, a large drop cloth was held in place by a quartet of frost pixies. They all began smiling and fluttering their wings at my approach.
"She's here!"
one of them called. Another flurry of pixies swooped in to watch from inside Starly's stall. "What's going on here? Corbin, are you out here?" My handsome beau appeared in the entry to the barn.
"You were supposed to be keeping a lookout,"
he whispered up at the pixies.
"Oh, oops,"
Astrid said with a giggle.
"I got distracted."
"What are you doing here?" I asked with a laugh. "Did you have something painted on the wall?" I asked, gesturing at the drop cloth. Corbin swept his stocking cap off his head and held it between his gloved hands.
"A painting?
"No."
Well, not exactly."
I quirked one brow. "Okay. Is this something to do with my Christmas gift? Am I not allowed to be out here? Sugarplum said you were looking for me." Corbin rushed forward, nearly tripping over his own feet.
No, I wanted you here."
He shot a quick scowl up at the pixies.
"I just wanted a little notice. Oh, never mind."
He turned back to me and reached for my hands.
"Lumi,"
he said, before pausing to clear his throat.
"There is something I wanted to show you."
My curiosity swelled to bursting as he led me closer to whatever was concealed behind the large swath of fabric.
"I know that neither of us can be in two places at once, and it's been a little tricky lately to make time for each other."
The words seemed to be some kind of code, because the pixies went all aflutter again and dropped their grasp on the cloth. It fell to a pool of fabric on the barn floor, revealing a large circle of script painted onto the wall. I recognized the runes because they were the same ones that glowed in my staff whenever I used an incantation. Frowning, I glanced up at Corbin. "What does that mean?" Corbin smiled and then spoke a few words in a language I didn't know. As the last one left his mouth, the runes glowed to life, and the circle was filled with glowing blue and white lights, and an image of the Frost Castle came into focus.
"This is our own personal portal. It takes you right from this barn to the gate outside the castle."
My eyes widened. "You're serious?" He laughed.
"We can take it for a spin right now if you'd like."
I stepped nearer to the portal. It looked just like the one we used outside of town, but I never imagined something could be installed in a barn or house. The amount of magic that must have been poured into those runes was more than I could even comprehend. No wonder Mom had kept me in the guest pavilion the past few days and hadn't let me tend to my normal chores. Corbin took my hands, drawing my attention back to him.
"I don't want to miss you anymore, Lumi. And I never want you to feel like you have to choose between me and your life here. I know how much this place means to you. And now you can come and go from one place to the next as easy as taking a step."
And just like that, exactly the way my dad had described it, a new warmth spread through my chest, driving out any shadow of a doubt that Corbin wasn't the one for me, or that somehow our worlds were too different. Tears sprang to my eyes. But before I could find the words to express myself, Corbin threw me for one more loop. He took a sweeping step backward and dropped to one knee. Right there, in the midst of scattered straw and muddy boot prints and stray reindeer fur.
"Selfishly, I thought that maybe showing you the portal first would help sway your answer," Corbin said, smiling up at me,
as he reached into the inner pocket of his coat and retrieved a small, black jewelry box.
Lumi Northrop, you mean the absolute world to me, and I never want to lose you. You give me hope that life can be so much more beautiful than I ever thought possible. Will you marry me?
With a subtle flourish, he opened the ring box, revealing a stunning, pear-shaped diamond solitaire. My hands flew to cover my face as jittery waves ran up and down my spine. Peeking out at him, I couldn't help but laugh, my hand still pressed to my mouth. This is crazy. I mean, I saw the article in the Inquirer, but they were saying you'd propose at the Yule Ball, and even then I didn't really believe it. Corbin pulled a face.
Why would I propose to you at the Yule Ball? There are already way too many eyeballs on us at an event like that. I mean, for all I know, you're about to tell me to kick rocks, he added with a grin. I couldn't risk that happening in public.
I lowered my hands and beamed at him. My answer is yes, Corbin. His eyes shone as he took my hand and slid the ring onto my finger.
Best news I've heard all year.
Epilogue. Autumn had arrived in Holiday Haven. Normally, this was when Christmas plans would kick into high gear and consume everyone's attention. This year was a little different, as there was one other event taking place beforehand that had tongues wagging. In less than 24 hours, Corbin Frost and I would exchange our vows in front of our friends, family, and a whole bunch of people I'd never met before. And with a royal wedding on the horizon, talk of Christmas had faded to the background. Good afternoon, Lumi. Or should I say, Princess Lumi? Turning, I smiled at a blue-haired fairy as she fluttered into the barn. Lumi is fine, I told her. Believe me, I'd like people to use my official title as little as possible. Arabella smiled. Understood. Although I doubt you'll have much luck with that. Everyone in town is so excited that one of our own is joining the royal family. People here have known your family for decades. Most have watched you grow up. And now, you'll be a princess. Starly poked her nose above her stall and immediately began rooting around the pockets of my thick winter coat. I smiled and stroked a hand down her fuzzy white nose. At least some things never change, huh, girl? You'll always just see me as a walking treat dispenser. Arabella laughed. Speaking of treats, we're all set up for the rehearsal dinner. Your mom sent me down to see if I could talk you into coming inside and getting ready for the party. I rolled my eyes. Of course she did. And yet I noticed she didn't come out here herself to volunteer to finish up the evening chores on my behalf. Arabella gave a knowing smile. She worked closely with my mother, as she was one of our longest-term vendors for the visitor events we hosted at the North Star Reindeer Sanctuary throughout the Christmas season. The fairy knew as well as I did Mom was allergic to anything dirty. She wasn't afraid of hard work. There were times she pulled longer hours than the rest of us, in fact, working into the night to balance budgets and organize schedules. She was the brains behind the expansion of the sanctuary into becoming a full-fledged event space. And now, with my wedding nearly done, she'd start ruminating over the idea of expanding the sanctuary's tourist operation even further by converting the old barn into a year-round wedding destination. I can help, Arabella offered. I took one look at her black party dress, carefully manicured nails, an expensive-looking watch. It's okay, really. I'm nearly finished. Dad's out rounding up the last few stragglers. I keep telling them we have a large enough herd we could use a border collie or something. Arabella chuckled. Sounds like Sugar Plum needs to start earning his carrot cake. Hey! A voice called from one of the reindeer stalls on the other side of the barn. I heard that. Arabella winced. Oops. Sorry, Sugar Plum. Didn't know you were out here. The Arctic hare hopped into view. one foot thumping on the concrete floor as he came to a stop beside my ankles. He had straw stuck in his velvety brown and white fur. As you could see, I've been hard at work all afternoon. He gave a shake and threw off most of the straw pieces. These reindeer make a royal mess of their stalls. I pressed my lips together to hold back a laugh. The hare was my familiar and could speak, but that was where his magic capabilities ended. He couldn't do a lot of work around the farm, but he was very good at spreading fresh straw. So that was his task, once I finished shoveling the muck out. It wasn't much, but it saved me a little time and made him feel productive. But maybe Arabella was onto something. Perhaps the hare could give reindeer wrangling a try. Starly poked at my lower right pocket with more insistence. "Hey there," I said with a giggle. "There's nothing in there for you." I dug into the pocket to show her. "All I have is Corbin's—" My smile froze, then shattered with a lash of panic as my fingers wriggled deeper into the pocket. "Lumi, is everything all right?" Arabella asked. "It's gone!" I exclaimed, still frantically digging in my coat. There, at the bottom of the pocket, was a tear in the threads. A hole just big enough. "Corbin's ring is gone." "Oh no." Arabella flew closer, leaving a trail of sparkling blue fairy dust in her wake. "Are you sure?" Nodding, I quickly searched my other pockets, though I knew they were empty, save a small peppermint which Starly quickly gobbled. "The jeweler dropped it off today. There was a mistake in the engraving on the first one I purchased, so they had to redo it. He came here to the sanctuary to hand-deliver it to me. I was in the middle of chores, so I stuffed it into my pocket. The box," I gestured across the barn, "is over there. It was too big to fit." My eyes squeezed shut. How could I be so stupid? I should have just taken the 5 minutes to walk it up to the house. No, you're not stupid, Lumi. Still cringing, I met the fairy's wide eyes. Arabella, what am I going to do? That ring could be anywhere. The fairy's wings fluttered a little faster, scattering glittery dust everywhere. Starly snuffled a half-sneeze. Oops, sorry. Her cheeks tinged with pink as she calmed her wings and landed gently on the floor. Well, I have my staff up at the barn. There's your parents, Corbin. Jack should be here soon enough. Sugarplum snorted. Yeah, like Mr. Fashionably Late will be any help. There isn't time to get a new ring made, but we can call the jeweler, Arabella continued, glossing over Sugarplum's remark. Maybe he has one you can use as a stand-in. I shook my head. Not like Corbin's. It was a special order with engravings on the outside and inside. The pictures from the ceremony will be everywhere. People will notice if he starts wearing a different ring. The tabloids will write articles. The gossip machine will whirl. Ugh. No, we just have to find the ring. I exhaled and set my shoulders with newfound determination. Sugarplum, can you go search the cabin? It might have fallen out when I was there for a quick lunch. The hare nodded, then bounded off to begin the hunt. Arabella fluttered back off the ground. I'll go get my staff, she began. No, please. I don't want anyone to know. Just go keep my mother busy for me. Tell her I'll be up shortly. I glanced at my watch. We still have an hour and a half, and it won't take me long to change. Are you sure? Arabella asked, her brow furrowing as much as her preternaturally smooth skin would allow. Yes, buy me 45 minutes. For all we know, it's somewhere here in the barn. Plus, I have the frost pixies. They love looking for shiny things, like little icy magpies. Arabella smiled, though concern lingered in her eyes. Okay, Lumi, I'll do my best. Thank you. She fluttered away, leaving me to call upon the pixies. Despite an hour of searching and half a dozen false alarms, by the time I finally relented and went to my cabin to get dressed for the rehearsal dinner, the ring was still missing. The frost pixies promised to keep up the hunt, but I told them to put a pin in things and attend the dinner. They'd all helped so much in the wedding preparations. I didn't want them to miss seeing their efforts finally come to fruition. We'd planned the wedding over the past 9 months, following Corbin's proposal before the Yule Ball. Even with the convenience of owning the venue and having established connections with vendors, it was amazing how much work had still been required to pull it together. Granted, many of the complications arose because of the sheer size of the event. While Corbin and I would have been content with a small affair, with only our family and closest friends in attendance, that simply wasn't an option. There were centuries of protocol and precedent to uphold when it came to throwing a royal wedding. For once, Jack's lackadaisical approach to ruling had played in our favor. Not only had he enthusiastically given us royal permission to marry, though it bucked tradition, Corbin being the younger brother and only a prince, whereas Jack was the crowned king, but he'd also not blinked an eye when we requested to marry outside the Frost Kingdom, and had pulled strings to ensure our union would be legally recognized with the swipe of a pen stroke. "It will be all right, Lumi," Sugarplum assured me as I slipped on a pair of pale pink satin slippers. As part of the preparation for the wedding, my parents had worked with a contractor to convert one of the old barns into a proper event space, which included adding 2 separate dressing suites and half a dozen bathrooms. The building kept its rustic charm, while adding modern conveniences that would make the place more accessible and desirable to potential brides and grooms for years to come. The bridal suite was decorated with elegant touches of pink and ivory, with a vanity table long enough to seat a whole gaggle of bridesmaids. On the opposite wall was a large, ornately framed, full-length mirror. The center of the room featured a generous seating area, with 2 overstuffed sofas and matching wingback chairs. A fireplace mirrored an enormous picture window, with sheer curtains to keep guests, or curious grooms, from sneaking a peek at the bride before the ceremony. An adjoining private bathroom made for a convenient changing area. As I lowered my foot back to the thick rug underneath the seating area, my attention shifted to the mirror. I was the first bride to use the suite, and there was something nice about being able to christen the place. The sanctuary was so important to my family and to the community of Holiday Haven at large, and I was endlessly grateful to start my next chapter of life at the place where all the previous ones had been written. Aunt Vivian had gone into overdrive mode upon learning of my engagement, and somehow I wound up agreeing to 4 custom dresses. Tonight, I wore a soft pink gown with long sleeves. My dark brown hair fell in loose waves, piled to one side with the help of a bejeweled comb, also compliments of Aunt Viv. Tomorrow, I would have 3 looks: the wedding gown, a reception dress, and a going-away silk jumpsuit. She'd also made a faux fur-lined cape. I couldn't help but laugh. "This all feels like a dream," I said, finding Sugarplum in the reflection. The hare hopped closer, his ears alert. I feel like someone should pinch me just to make sure it's all real. The hare stood on his hind legs, balancing his rotund body as he peered up at me. "It is very real, Luby, and very well deserved. I know the idea of being a princess is overwhelming, but if you ask me, the Frost Kingdom could ask for no one better to serve them and look after them. You are kind, fiercely loyal, intelligent, and filled with endless compassion. Corbin is lucky to have you, and so are his royal subjects." Tears sprang to my eyes, and a lump formed in my throat at my familiar's words. As I glanced down, one tear slipped free and splashed onto the carpet. "Thank you, Sugarplum. That means the world to me." The hare inclined his head, his paws folding together in front of his furry chest. "You're most welcome. Now let's get to your party. I'm eager to try some of these hoard treats you and your mother keep talking about. I laughed, sending a few more tears splashing down my cheeks. Wiping them away, I smiled. Hors d'oeuvres, Sugar Plum. Hey, I don't care what you call them. I just want a plate to myself. After that, I'll go see if I can't find that ring. Oh, you don't have to do that, I told him, exhaling as I reached for the doorknob. We can use the placeholder. I took Arabella's suggestion and called the jeweler. He's bringing a different ring first thing tomorrow morning. I want to help, Louie. I just know we could find it. The hare's determined tone told me there was no point in trying to talk him out of it at this point. He was on a mission. All I could do was make sure he got an extra big portion of appetizers for his trouble. He was going to go nuts over the maple roasted carrots. Remind me to thank your Aunt Viv at some point tonight, Corbin said with a wide grin as he spun me in a twirl out on the dance floor. I laughed as he pulled me in close once more. Just wait until you see the wedding gown. She must have changed the design half a dozen times along the way, but I have to admit the end result is pretty stunning. She's a perfectionist, Corbin said with a smile. Although, as I've said before, I'd marry you even if you showed up in a gown made of burlap. Oh, yes, imagine the gossip columnist's delight, I said with a giggle. They'd have something to write about until the next solstice. You could sew a little lace on it, I suppose. Maybe set off some kind of trend, Corbin teased. Uh-huh, because who wouldn't want a garment with tiny holes all over it while living in the North Pole? We laughed together as we took another turn around the dance floor. My parents smiled over at us as they waltzed slightly out of step with the music. Despite her best efforts, Mom hadn't convinced my dad to take a series of dance classes ahead of the wedding. The rehearsal dinner had gone off without a hitch. Well, aside from the missing ring. Luckily, we'd glossed over that part of the practice ceremony, with the minister simply making a note of where that portion would occur. The ceremony was rather lengthy, including several traditions that were new to me, as I'd never attended a wedding in the Frost Kingdom, let alone a royal one. Afterward, we'd gathered for a lovely catered meal, courtesy of the head chef of the best restaurant in the entire Frost Kingdom. Then, we'd taken to the dance floor, as the string band ran through a few songs that would play during the reception. It all felt a little surreal, even as I relished every step. The past 9 months suddenly seemed like a blur. Every decision and painstaking moment of planning had led to this magical evening, and it was only a small slice of what tomorrow would bring. When the song ended, Corbin and I broke apart to applaud the musicians. The leader of the band took a deep bow. "Thank you for allowing us to play for your most special day, Your Grace," he said, addressing Corbin specifically. He smiled as he straightened. "I know that I speak for many in the Frost Kingdom when I raise a glass to our future princess, Lumi." "Hear, hear," Corbin called. Around us, people raised glasses and joined the toast. A server rushed over to provide Corbin and me with flutes of champagne. "To Princess Lumi!" A flutter of emotion tangled with panic in my chest as the words echoed through the beautifully adorned barn. My cheeks warmed as I lifted my glass a few inches. "Thank you." Corbin smiled at me and placed his free hand on my back, the warmth reassuring. "Thank you all for being here tonight," he said, directing his attention to everyone in the room. His eyes caught his brother's, and he paused. "It means so much to us that you were all here to attend this gathering, and even more so that you'll be standing by our sides tomorrow when we make things official. Jack, thank you for giving Lumi and me your blessing." Jack flashed his signature grin. "Hey, whatever it takes to keep me out of the hot seat. With you two planning a wedding, the press has been delightfully distracted, leaving me to indulge myself freely." Laughter rippled through the room, and I couldn't help but notice a trio of female servers primping and preening from their place behind one of the banquet tables. Corbin gave a long, suffering sigh before raising his glass aloft. In any case, none of this would have happened without you. In fact, Lumi and I might not have met if not for you getting your royal behind kidnapped. That drew more laughter, and Jack joined in. Yeah, you're welcome. Now come on, let's get the music going again. And someone bring me another bottle of bubbly. The trio of servers practically tripped over one another in their hurry to fulfill the request. Corbin shook his head as the band resumed their music. Some things never change, I guess. I leaned into his side and rested my head against his chest. No, I suppose not. But then maybe that's for the best. I don't know how much more change I can take right now. Corbin chuckled, his muscles moving under my cheek. Fair enough. Just think, this time tomorrow, we'll be making our getaway. And the day after that, we'll be on a beach, slathered in sunscreen, sipping a couple of fruity cocktails with little umbrellas in them. I laughed. Oh, believe me, I can't wait. We'd decided to escape the North entirely for our honeymoon and would be spending 2 sun-soaked weeks in the Seychelles. I'd never left the North before, and aside from the annual summer solstice party, had never been somewhere tropical and warm before. As visions of sailboats and seashells danced through my head, I spotted Sugarplum hopping into view from down the hall. My heart swelled with hope, and I straightened. I'll be right back, I told Corbin. All right. I think I'm going to get another slice of cake. Do you want one too? He asked as I started to walk away. Sure, thanks. I managed to keep myself composed enough to avoid scurrying over to the hair, but as soon as we stepped out of sight of the guests, I twisted my hands together. Did you find it? Sugarplum's ears drooped, and I had my answer. Oh, no, I groaned. Looks like we're going to have to officially go with Plan B, huh? I'm so sorry, Luby. I can't find it anywhere, Sugarplum said, still downcast. It's okay, I told him, even as I struggled to bottle up my disappointment. It's my fault, not yours. Footsteps sounded behind me, and I turned to find Jack strolling down the hall, his hands tucked into the pockets of his gray slacks. Now, what's this? A secret meeting? Are you planning to prank Corbin? I've been debating between drawing something on his forehead and tricking him into thinking it's permanent ink or filling his wedding shoes with whipped cream. Thoughts? Jack. My eyes widened. You cannot be serious. This isn't some kind of joke. This is our wedding. Jack chuckled and leaned casually against the wall. Relax, Lumi. I'm only kidding. Besides, if I was planning something, I certainly wouldn't tell you. I peered at him, one brow raised. Sugarplum stamped one hind foot. We don't have time for your tricks. We have a real crisis, so unless you're going to help, scram. I cringed. Besides Corbin, the last person I wanted to tell about the missing ring was Jack. A crisis? Jack purred, his smile spreading. What kind of crisis? It's nothing, I snapped. Please, Jack, just go, and don't say anything about this. It's important, okay? Jack's amusement lingered, but he managed to somewhat contain his Cheshire grin. Come on, Lumi. Tell me what's going on. I can probably help. Besides, you're about to be my sister-in-law. You should trust me. I choked back a sarcastic burst of laughter. No thanks. No offense, but no thanks. We've got it under control. Sugarplum nodded his head in one definitive motion. That's right. Just then, a tiny frost pixie blew into view over Jack's shoulder. The tiny winged creature made a beeline over to us, a flurry of snowflakes sailing in her wake. Lumi, there you are. We looked everywhere. There's no sign of the ring. Ring, eh? Jack met my gaze. You lost a ring? I sighed. Yes. I had Corbin's ring in my pocket while I was out doing chores today, and somewhere along the way, it slipped out through a tear in the lining. It could be anywhere. We've had a good 2 inches of fresh snowfall, so any hope of finding it is, well, pretty pointless. Well, why didn't you just say so? Jack gave me a wink, then tugged my arm as he headed for the door. Come on. Jack, where are we going? To find the ring, of course. You got a pair of boots around here somewhere? My protesting fell on deaf ears as I hurried to follow Jack. We made a pit stop at the bridal suite to get my waterproof boots and coat, then stumbled outside through a side entrance and began trudging toward the pasture. Jack seemed immune to the cold. But then, that made sense. Corbin was often like that, too. Jack, I've already been out here looking. The pixies have been looking. So has Sugarplum. Even the reindeer were out here nosing around, trying to find it. Jack shot me an impish grin and lifted his hands. Trust me, I got this. Exhaling a frustrated puff of white air, I wrapped my arms more tightly around myself. Even with my longest winter coat, it wasn't doing much to keep my legs from rapidly turning into icicles. Corbin said he would marry me in a burlap sack. I wondered how he'd feel about a bride with severe frostbite. I was about to plead with Jack once more, but he was muttering something under his breath. Crackles of energy and magic coursed through the air as Jack chanted some kind of spell. Slowly, a whirl of snow built up around him, enclosing him in a cyclone of ice. With a final word, he threw out his hands and sent the fierce wind out across the pasture. Sugarplum and I both gasped as the blanket of snow covering the pasture rolled away as effortlessly as a well-loved rug. With a clap of his hands, the scattering of frost pixies zipped over, all aflutter. There, Jack said, turning back to me, his grin firmly back in place. That should help. Pixies, light it up. The pixies flapped their wings, sending bits of moonlight over the bare field. A glint caught my eye, and I nearly tripped as I hurried toward it. Sugarplum got there first and let out a triumphant cheer. It's here, Loomy! It's here! I plucked the ring from a frozen dirt clod and held it up to the moonlight reflecting off the nearest pixie's wings. Jack chuckled as he sauntered over. Now see, aren't you glad you confided in me? Bewildered, I met his glittering eyes. Thank you, Jack. Well, I don't really know what to say. A laugh bubbled freely. This really means a lot to me. He hitched one shoulder. Hey, that's what brothers are for, right? Smiling, I launched myself at him, crushing him in an embrace. When we parted, he held out one hand, palm up. You want me to hold on to that for you? His promises of a prank echoed through my mind, and I clutched the ring a little tighter. I think I'd best keep a hold of it. Jack pulled a face as he slapped the palm to his chest. I'm wounded. I rolled my eyes. Come on, Your Grace. I'm sure it's nothing a little more cake can't fix. I started back toward the barn without waiting for him. He caught up within a few seconds, chuckling to himself. You know, Loomy, nothing is official yet. You still have time to ditch old man Corby and run away with me. Jack. Only kidding, he laughed. Now tell me more about your friend Hannah. She looked rather fetching in that dress. The day of the wedding arrived in a quiet fashion. My eyes fluttered awake, and for a long moment I lay in my bed, alone, smiling up at the ceiling. Of course, that bubble of peace quickly popped. My mom had insisted on me sleeping in the guest room at the main house the night before, and as soon as she heard me say good morning to Sugarplum, She threw open the door and entered the room with a flurry of excitement. Aunt Viv wasn't too far behind her.
Wake up, Sleeping Beauty, Aunt Viv declared. Your prince is waiting on you.
I groaned as I sat up in bed and rubbed my eyes. You two are just as bad as the paparazzi. Can we just be Corbin and Lumi today? Mom smiled as she came to sit on the side of my bed. She cupped my cheek with one soft, warm hand, the gesture reminiscent of my childhood goodnight ritual when she and Dad used to tuck me in after shooing away any monsters that might lurk in the closet.
How are you feeling? Did you get a good night's sleep?
More or less, I replied. I'd slept a lot more soundly than I would have had Jack not found Corbin's ring. But by some miracle, he'd kept his end of the bargain and hadn't said another word about it after we returned to the rehearsal dinner.
Lumi, dear, it's your wedding day, Aunt Viv reminded me. Cheer up. You're not getting cold feet, are you?
Well,
beyond the normal chill around here.
No, I exclaimed. No, it's not that. I love Corbin. It's just a lot to process, I guess. Everything has happened so fast. In the beginning, it seemed far away, but then it's like someone stepped on the cosmic fast-forward button, and now it's here. It's today. Aunt Viv and Mom exchanged a knowing smile.
Lumi,
Mom said, returning her gaze to me.
I know you think you're an unlikely princess, and that you're not crazy about the spotlight, but I believe everything happens for a reason. I've watched you over these past months, the way you've diplomatically handled all the challenges of your new life as a member of the Frost family. You're already a princess, dear. Today, we're just making it official. She smiled, her eyes glistening, as she gently patted my cheek before taking my hands. I'm so proud of you, honey. Emotion swelled in my chest, and I had to clear my throat. Diana, don't make the girl cry, Aunt Viv chided. Her eyes will get all puffy. I laughed. Hey, at least I don't have my makeup on yet. No mascara to ruin. I swiped at a stray tear, and then gave my mom's hands another squeeze. Thank you, Mom. Thank you for everything. I know it's been a lot these past few months, with the construction and the royal wedding planners all piled on top of everything else you do around here. Oh, honey, think nothing of it. I'd do anything for you, to see you happy. She rose from the bed and stood beside Aunt Viv. All right. Aunt Viv clapped her hands together once, and a surge of fairies flew into the room. Time to make the magic happen. We have 4 hours before the ceremony. Sterling, Winterspell, let's do a final dress fitting in case we need to make any changes. Perry and Magnus, let's let Lumi eat a little breakfast before we start hair and makeup. The fairies all gave Aunt Viv a nod, their demeanor that of soldiers preparing to go to the front lines. I couldn't help but laugh. Mom was right. My life had already changed. It was time to fully step into my destiny. You ready for this? Dad asked, as he offered me the crook of his arm. He looked dapper in his dark gray suit, with a pine and juniper boutonniere affixed to his breast pocket. Smiling, I took his arm, grateful for the warmth and steadiness. As ready as I'll ever be, I said with a shaky exhale. I hadn't sneaked a peek at the crowd waiting inside the barn. Logically, I knew how many guests would be in attendance as I'd helped oversee the invitations. But there was a difference between seeing a number printed on a page and actually beholding that many people in one place. Knowing their eyes would all be on me. Dad patted the back of my hand. You'll be great. At the end of today, it will be you and Corbin, and all of this pomp will be a blur of happy memories for the two of you to cherish for all of your years together. Thanks, Dad. He sniffed, the emotion catching me off guard. Imagine my little Lumi, all grown up and off to live in a castle.
Oh, Dad, not you too, I said with a giggle. Come on, I'm counting on you to help me keep it together. He chuckled, and after a brief moment to wipe at his eyes with a handkerchief, he rallied. A royal assistant ran over with my bouquet, and I wrapped my hands around the burlap-wrapped stems of the juniper, holly, and snow roses. It was simple, but elegant. We'd done our best to merge the simplicity of life on a reindeer sanctuary in the middle of the frozen woods with the opulence of Corbin's life back in the Frost Kingdom. The flowers were simple, but they were abundant, with large arrangements placed throughout both the ceremony and reception spaces. Twinkle lights had been swapped for crystal chandeliers, hay bales replaced by white chairs and artfully arranged tablescapes. I'd slipped in little mementos of my upbringing, with the decked-out hot cocoa station Arabella was running for all the guests. Outside, there were fire pits set up with tree stump seats and s'mores fixings packaged up in small boxes. My dress was fit for a princess, that was a given, but I'd steered Aunt Viv away from a full-on cupcake princess look. It was sleek, with a mermaid silhouette and long lace sleeves. The chapel train was hand-stitched lace as well, with the frost crest embroidered at the end. Naturally, I also wore a tiara, but Corbin had ordered the most understated one he could get by the powers that be who made those sorts of decisions for the royal family. Ahead of me, 2 wreath-trimmed doors stood closed, the wreaths festooned with the same delicate roses that comprised most of my bridal bouquet. A line of bridesmaids in burgundy stood before me, most of them ladies I'd never met before, but members of the extended royal family who had earned their places in the procession by some other set of mysterious rules and centuries of tradition. A woman in a chic pantsuit raised one hand and began counting down from 5. 2 assistants in suits matching my dad took their places, one on each door. I held my breath. The doors opened, and soft string music swept over me. The flower girl began her journey down the aisle. I closed my eyes as we inched forward, still not ready to see the full mass of the audience. We'd banned cameras for all but the royal photographers, but even so, there were flashbulbs snapping off in rapid-fire succession. "Lumi, it's time," Dad whispered. My eyes fluttered open, and my feet began moving. The music changed. The crowd got to their feet. We took our first steps inside the hall, and the bottom of my stomach dropped out, sending my heart into free fall. Everyone was smiling, their hands clasped in front of their chests or pressing tissues to their eyes. It took me several long moments before I even spotted one familiar face. Dad kept moving us forward as I did my best to smile, even as I hoped the photographers would be skilled enough to edit out any deer-in-the-headlights panic in my eyes. After it seemed like we'd walked a mile, I finally tore my eyes away from the crowd, and I found my groom standing at the end of the white satin aisle runner. Time screeched to a halt, and my heart ricocheted back to where it belonged. We reached the end of the aisle, and my dad kissed my cheek. Hannah, my maid of honor, took the bouquet as I stepped toward Corbin. He took my trembling hands, and with one simple smile, everything else melted away. The reception was every bit as magical as the ceremony itself. Love and support overwhelmed us from our families, friends, and residents of both Holiday Haven and the Frost Kingdom. It was a perfect mirror of the ceremony and its implications, seeing the 2 parts of my life blend into one. I'd even spotted Eli, the young elf, seated with Doc Patches and Mrs. Patches at their reception table. It seemed they'd found a way to mend their broken relationship after all. When we'd cut the cake and danced until our feet hurt, we finally retreated to our place at the head banquet table to snack on cake and await the myriad of toasts to come. As I sipped from my glass of spiced wine, I nudged my chin toward the other end of the table where Jack was smiling at a striking brunette seated beside him. Who is that over there speaking with Jack? They look pretty cozy. Corbin leaned forward, following my gaze, then chuckled. Looks like my plan is working. Frowning, I glanced up at him. Plan? He grinned. I haven't had a chance to tell you about it quite yet. Hey, we're married now. You can't go around making sneaky plans without including me, I teased, needling him in the ribs with my elbow. So cough it up. Who is she? She's his matchmaker. My brows creased even further. Jack agreed to work with a matchmaker? Well, not exactly. Corbin's grin turned conspiratorial as he lowered his voice. Her name is Noelle, and I've hired her to find Jack a wife, and thereby the kingdom a queen. Phew! I took a sip from my wine glass. Whatever you're paying her, it's not nearly enough. Probably not, Corbin agreed with a laugh. I set things in motion last year, before Jack agreed to let me marry before he did. Tradition might not mean much to Jack, but I must say I didn't expect him to bulldoze over it the way he did, and I was eager to propose. So, I had a crazy idea and ran with it. My heart warmed at the lengths he'd gone simply to marry me. I squeezed his hand under the table. That's really sweet. Anything for you, Lumi. I rested my cheek on his shoulder and watched Jack and the brunette laughing together as Jack told an animated story. My eyes narrowed slightly as I watched Jack continue his tale. There was something in his eyes that plucked at my curiosity. Was it my imagination? Or did it look like maybe there was something more brewing between the matchmaker and the elusive royal bachelor? Nah. Surely it resulted from my matrimonial love goggles. Today, all that mattered was that I finally had my prince. For this Christmas, and all of the Christmases to come. As for Jack, well, that's a story for another winter. Author's note. I hope you enjoyed Lumi and Corbin's final adventure in Holiday Haven. This series was such a joy to work on, mostly thanks to my fellow winter witches, Bella, Jerry, Elle, and Aaron. It's always bittersweet to end a series and say goodbye to beloved characters, but I have a feeling this isn't the last you'll see of Lumi, Corbin, and Jack Frost. We might be leaving Holiday Haven behind, but there is more to explore in the Frost Kingdom, including the tale of a plucky matchmaking witch who just might thaw the walls of ice around Jack Frost's heart.